My boss laughed when I asked for one day off. Hours later, he was begging me to come back. I never liked calling in sick. Even as a kid, I'd drag myself to school with a fever because missing a day felt like losing ground. My dad used to say, "Kid, the world doesn't pause for you." He said it like a proverb, not a warning. He'd say it about everything: dentist appointments, sick days, the time my cat died, the time my grandmother died. He meant it kindly. He meant it the way some dads do, where the whole point is they want you to be tougher than they were. My dad was not a soft man, but he was a kind one, and I miss him every day. I'm Danielle, Donnie, Castillo. I'm 31. I live in Plano, Texas, in one of those suburban developments off Spring Creek Parkway where every house looks like the next one, but mine has a blue door because the previous owner painted it blue and I never got around to fixing it, and now the mailman knows me by it. I've been at my job for 6 years. I am the senior accountant at a regional architecture firm called Holloway & Estes. We have 42 employees, 9 architects, 6 designers, 3 project managers, 11 in admin, 4 in IT, 4 partners, and 5 in finance. I run finance. Well, I run finance along with Brenda, who's been doing this for 31 years and taught me everything I know. Brenda is 68. She told me last year she was planning to retire at the end of this fiscal year. That was news to the partners. That was not news to me. We had been quietly planning for months. My job is mostly normal accounting: AP, AR, payroll, quarterly taxes. The boring stuff that makes a business. But the part of my job no one else can do is the AITA billing. AITA stands for American Institute of Architects, and their billing format, AITA G702 and G703, is this specific kind of construction document invoicing that architects use to bill their clients on long projects. It's a notarized form. It has a cover sheet and a continuation sheet, with line items for scheduled value, work completed this period, materials stored, retainage, and a balance to finish. It's a pain in the butt. Clients prefer it because it's standardized. Architects prefer it because it's standard. Practically nobody else in the country knows how to fill one out. I am one of those people. I know it because Brenda taught me, and Brenda knows it because her mother taught her. And her mother was a bookkeeper in Houston in the 70s. There is a small, weird, mostly informal network of women in Texas who have been doing AITA billing for 40 years. And I am at the new end of it. We email each other sometimes. We compare notarized stamps. Our biggest client is a Dallas-based real estate developer called Brackenridge Properties. They are building a 26-story mixed-use tower in Uptown. The contract is worth $11 million in architectural fees. We bill them once a month, on the last business day, on an AITA G702. If we don't bill by the deadline, our contract says we lose 1.5% of that month's invoiced amount as a penalty. April's invoice was for $1,240,000. 1.5% of that is $18,360. That is real money. That is also, indirectly, my bonus. This month the deadline was the 30th, which was a Tuesday. I tell you that now so you understand why, in about 9 hours. Andrew Holloway, the senior partner who thinks he's a thought leader because he has a podcast nobody listens to, was going to be very interested in my whereabouts. The reason I needed the day off was my stepmother, Linda. Linda married my dad when I was 14. Linda is not my biological mother, but she has been my mother for 17 years. And she raised me after my dad had his stroke in 2014 and couldn't speak for 2 years. She is 61. She has cataracts in both eyes. She'd been putting off surgery for 2 years because, and I quote, "I don't want anyone cutting on my eyes while I'm awake." She had her left eye done March 5th, no problem. The right eye was scheduled for the last Friday of this month at the Eye Center of Texas in Dallas. Pre-op was Tuesday morning at 8. The procedure itself was scheduled for the following Friday, with a 48-hour follow-up at the surgeon's office. I'd cleared the day with Brenda, who was covering for me while I sat in the surgeon's waiting room with Linda. Linda's daughter from her first marriage, Robin, lives in Waco and was taking the Friday procedure off work to be there. But for Tuesday's pre-op, it was just me. Linda didn't want Robin to take 2 days off in 1 week. Linda didn't want me to take 2 days off in 1 week. I told Linda I was taking Friday off regardless and she could fight me on it. She said, "Honey." I said, "Linda." She said, "Fine. I have not taken a day off at Holloway & Estes in 11 months. The last time I called in sick was for food poisoning in August. The last time I took PTO for something personal was last Father's Day, when I went to Galveston to scatter some of my dad's ashes at the spot where he proposed to my mom. In 1989, there were ashes left over. We hadn't known what to do with them. I do not need to get into that. The point is, I am not someone who takes days off. Or I wasn't. I was about to be. The Friday before I asked for the day off, I walked into Andrew's office at 3:15 p.m. Andrew's office is the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the parking lot. Which sounds fancy, but it isn't, because the parking lot is the focal view. Andrew has a podcast microphone on his desk even though the podcast hasn't recorded an episode. Since October, he has a San Antonio Spurs pennant from 2014, a framed photo of himself with the governor at a ribbon cutting, and a coffee mug that says, Big Tex, which I think he bought at the state fair but pretends is professional memorabilia. Hey, Andrew, got a minute? Donnie, yeah, sit. What's up? I told him Linda's surgery, the pre-op, the Friday procedure, who was covering that Bren. Story 2. My sister locked me out of Dad's hospital room. She never expected the doctor to hand me the documents. By the time I got to the cardiac floor, my sister had already positioned herself outside my dad's hospital room like a bouncer outside a club nobody actually wanted to be in. She was standing there in white sneakers that still looked box fresh, black leggings, a camel-colored cardigan, and one of those giant insulated cups with the straw. Her hair was blown out, her makeup was done, and she had that tight, pinched expression she gets whenever she thinks she's being inconvenienced by other people's emotions. I had been in the car for almost 3.5 hours, driving from Chicago to Indianapolis on coffee and pure anxiety after getting a 2-sentence text from her at 6:14 that morning. Dad had a medical episode. He's stable. I'm handling it. That was it. No hospital name at first. No room number. No explanation of what medical episode meant. I had to call her 4 times before she answered, and when she finally did, she sighed like I'd interrupted a manicure. He had some chest pain and got dizzy, she said. They're running tests. What hospital? St. Vincent. Melissa, what happened? I literally just told you. She has always done that thing where she gives you the smallest possible amount of information and then acts like you're dramatic for wanting the rest. So I drove down from my apartment in Logan Square in the same clothes I'd slept in, gray sweatshirt, old jeans, hair shoved into a claw clip, no makeup, face still puffy from waking up too fast. I didn't even stop to change out of my house slippers until I was already in the garage and realized I was about to drive to Indiana wearing shearling Birkenstocks. And then when I finally got there, after parking on the 5th level of a garage that smelled like hot concrete and brake dust, riding the elevator down with a family carrying balloons, and jogging through the lobby past the Starbucks and the little gift shop that sells magazines nobody under 60 buys anymore, my own sister put a hand out in front of me and said, "You're not going in there." I actually thought I misheard her. I said, "Excuse me? He needs to rest. I just drove 3.5 hours. And that was your choice." It was like being dropped straight back into our childhood. Melissa has always been older than me by 6 years. But not in the normal sibling way where the older one acts protective or bossy sometimes. She has this weird thing where she thinks seniority means ownership. When we were kids in Fishers, she called my room the extra bedroom, because technically the house had been bought before I was born. When I was in middle school and Dad took me to my first Colts game, she pouted for 2 days because she said she was the one who used to do special things with him. First, everything with her is territory. People aren't people to Melissa. They're positions. Dad is dad, yes, but he's also the parent she had first. The house is the house, but it's also the stage where she gets to play favorite daughter. Even family tragedies somehow become her event planning opportunities. When our mom was dying 9 years ago, Melissa somehow made every conversation about who had been sleeping more nights at the hospital, who the nurses recognized, who Mom lit up for, who had brought the right chapstick, who had chosen the right blanket. If you've never dealt with someone like that, it sounds exaggerated when you write it out. I know it does. I used to think if I just explained her behavior clearly enough to other people, they would finally say, "Oh wow, that's nuts." But mostly they'd say some version of, "She's just stressed," or "That's how oldest daughters are," or "At least she helps." And that last part was what always trapped me. Because Melissa did help, or at least, for a long time, she looked like the one helping. She lived 20 minutes from Dad after her divorce. I lived in Chicago. She could drop by after work. She could drive him to appointments. She could bring groceries. She could talk to the HVAC guy when the furnace made that rattling noise it always made in February. Meanwhile, I was the one calling every Sunday, flying down every other month, sending him DoorDash gift cards he barely knew how to use, and feeling guilty basically all the time. So when Melissa said she was handling it, everybody around her tended to relax. I didn't, mostly because for the last 8 months, Dad had been saying little things on the phone that didn't sit right with me. Nothing huge at first, just off. He'd say Melissa was sorting through his paperwork, or straightening out the finances, or helping him consolidate some accounts. He'd mention she'd taken over the grocery shopping because it's easier this way. He'd tell me she wanted him to look at some real estate forms, then laugh in that dry way he had when he didn't want to admit he was uneasy. Dad is 72, retired civil engineer, meticulous to the point of comedy. He's the kind of person who still has manuals for appliances he no longer owns. The man had a label maker phase that lasted 11 years. He had a file cabinet in the basement with hanging folders for home, auto, taxes, medical, insurance, and miscellaneous, and inside miscellaneous were subfolders. He kept passwords in a little black address book written in the same all-caps block handwriting he used on birthday cards. This is a man who once returned a lawn sprinkler because the instructions said, tool-free setup. And he needed a screwdriver to tighten one part. So when that man starts saying, Melissa's taking care of the online stuff now, it gets my attention. I asked if he wanted me to come down and help go through things, and he told me no. Not because everything was fine, exactly, but because he hated conflict and Melissa was already complaining that I swooped in from out of state to criticize. That was another favorite phrase of hers. Swoop in, as if caring from farther away counted less. About 6 weeks before the hospital thing, Dad called me on a Tuesday night around 9:30, which was unusual because he knew I usually had work the next morning and he never liked bothering people after dark. I was folding laundry and watching reruns of Top Chef on the couch, and when I saw his name, I answered right away. He sounded tired, not sick, exactly, just worn down in a way that made my chest go tight. He said, "You busy?" I said, "No. What's up?" There was a pause. I could hear the TV in the background on his end. One of those cable news voices that all sound like they're about to announce war or weather. Then he said, "Melissa wants me to sign some things." That was how he put it. Not, "We met with an attorney," not, "I updated a document," not, "I'm changing something." Just some things. I sat up. What things? She says it would make everything simpler if she were on the deed. I remember actually going cold. Why would she be on the deed? She says if anything happens to me, it avoids probate, and since she's nearby, she can manage repairs, and if I ever need assisted living, it would be easier to sell. And what do you want? Another pause. Well, he said, I don't especially want anybody on the deed while I'm still living here. It would almost be funny if it weren't such a perfect description of my father. That was him exactly, not outraged, not even suspicious in a dramatic way, just mildly offended by the premise. I asked if he had signed anything. He said no, but Melissa had been persistent. Then, and this part made my stomach drop, he said, she gets upset when I ask for more time. I went quiet for a second and stared at a pile of unmatched socks in my lap. Dad, I said, do not sign anything without your own attorney looking at it. I know. I'm serious. I know, Lauren. Can you send me photos of whatever she gave you? He sighed. She took them back. I said, what do you mean she took them back? She said I was making a big deal out of nothing, and if I wasn't ready, she'd bring them another day. That call ended with him telling me not to start a family war, which is the kind of thing people say when a family war has actually already started and they're hoping nobody says it out loud. I offered to come down that weekend. He told me he'd think about it. 2 days later, Melissa texted me completely out of nowhere. Dad is overwhelmed. Please stop putting ideas in his head. That was Melissa's style too. She never accused directly. She framed everything like she was the calm adult addressing a disruptive child. I wrote back, he called me. She sent the thumbs up reaction and nothing else. After that, I started checking in with Dad more often. At first he sounded normal. Then there were more weird little things. He couldn't find the folder where he kept his bank statements. Melissa had moved some files around. He said his debit card had been frozen because of suspicious activity. But Melissa was dealing with it. He mentioned she was stopping by basically every day now, because her apartment had a leak and she was spending a lot of time at the house. Then in late May, when I came down for a weekend, I saw enough to make me actively nervous. Melissa's car was in Dad's driveway Friday night when I got there, along with a silver Jeep I didn't recognize. The front hall had 2 extra pairs of shoes, an Amazon return bag, and a pink Stanley cup on the table where Dad usually kept his mail. There was a diffusing oil thing plugged into the kitchen outlet, making the whole first floor smell like vanilla and eucalyptus, which was aggressively not my dad. He was in the den watching a baseball game, and he looked happy to see me. But also distracted in the way he got when he was trying to manage the emotional temperature of a room. Melissa came down the stairs in biker shorts and an oversized Northwestern sweatshirt, hers, not mine, and kissed the air next to my cheek like we were women who brunch together instead of sisters who communicate mostly through tension. "Oh good," she said. "You made it." I looked upstairs. "Are you staying here?" She laughed, like the question itself was naive. "Temporarily." The Jeep belonged to her boyfriend, Brent. Brent was one of those men in their 40s who dress like they're permanently on the verge of going to a sports bar. Expensive quarter zip, jeans that are somehow both stiff and distressed. Watch too big for his wrist, Bluetooth earpiece sometimes just because. He appeared in the kitchen about 10 minutes later and greeted me like we'd all rented this place together for the weekend. What followed was one of the most surreal visits of my life. Melissa had effectively colonized the house. She had toiletries in the upstairs bathroom, a ring light set up in Dad's former home office because she'd started doing content in there for her wellness brand, and labeled containers in the fridge. Dad's fridge, the same man who used to live on Diet Coke, turkey sandwiches, and Costco fruit trays now had almond creamer and pre-cut celery sticks and gut health shot bottles on the shelf. At one point I opened a kitchen drawer looking for scissors and found a stack of unopened mail with Dad's name on it rubber banded together. That night, after Melissa and Brent went out to dinner, Dad finally admitted she'd been there, more than temporarily. "How long?" I asked. He shrugged. "Off and on since March." "Dad, she had some rent issues. Is she paying you anything?" He looked at the TV. "Dad, she buys groceries." That was when I knew it was bad. My father, who could tell you exactly what he'd paid for the roof in 2014, suddenly didn't know how to answer money questions. I asked if he'd gone to his attorney about the deed thing. He said no. Melissa said hiring an attorney was old-fashioned and expensive and that a friend of Brent's did real estate paperwork all the time. That sentence nearly made my brain leave my body. I said, "Dad, absolutely not." He rubbed his forehead and told me again not to make trouble. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I did something I'm still not sure was right. But I'd do it again. I checked the mail stack. There were late notices, not utilities, weirdly enough. Those were on autopay. It was smaller stuff. Property tax reminder, credit card statement, a notice from his bank about online access changes. And tucked in there was an envelope from a title company. The envelope had already been opened. Inside was a preliminary transfer document with a sticky note on it in Melissa's handwriting. "We can sign this next week." Easy. I put it back exactly how I found it, hands shaking. When Dad came downstairs, I didn't ease into it. I just asked, "Do you know there's title paperwork in your mail?" His face changed in a way I won't forget. Not confusion, not even surprise. More like the look of somebody caught between embarrassment and relief. He sat down hard at the kitchen table. "I didn't know she'd left it there," he said. "Dad, this is not okay." "I know. Then why is this still happening?" And he said something that honestly broke my heart a little. "I'm tired, Lauren." That was the whole answer. He was tired. Tired of being pressured. Tired of being treated like an obstacle in his own house. Tired of having one daughter always on him and the other one sounding alarmed from 3 states away. Tired of administrative stuff. Tired of confronting the fact that getting older makes everyone around you start speaking about your life like it's a file that needs reorganizing. I spent most of that weekend trying not to explode. I helped him gather his important documents. I wrote down the number for his attorney, Marcy Klein, on a yellow legal pad and put it by the phone even though Melissa rolled her eyes and said, "He doesn't need to be spooked into lawyering up over family." Family. People really do use that word like a weapon. I left Sunday feeling awful, and 10 days later Dad called to say he had finally talked to Marcy. He sounded more like himself. "She said not to sign anything," he told me. I actually laughed from relief. "Yeah, no kidding. And she's drawing up a revocation for that old power of attorney." I sat straight up at my desk. What old power of attorney? That was how I found out Melissa had gotten Dad to sign a limited financial power of attorney after he'd had a minor fall the previous winter. According to Dad, she pitched it as a convenience thing in case he needed help paying bills during recovery. He hadn't fully understood what he was signing. Or maybe he had understood just enough to know he was uncomfortable but didn't want to fight. Either way, Marcy had seen a copy and told him to revoke it immediately if he didn't want Melissa acting for him. I asked why he hadn't told me. He said, very quietly, "Because I was ashamed." That was our dad in a sentence. He could survive layoffs in the 90s, build half his own deck, take care of mom through chemo. but being manipulated by one of his own kids made him feel stupid. And Melissa, whether she said it explicitly or not, was very good at making him feel like resisting her was irrational. Marcy prepared new documents. Dad told me he was going to name me his healthcare proxy and make financial decisions require a neutral third party if he was ever incapacitated. He sounded almost amused by his own sudden legal backbone. Then 3 weeks passed and everything got quiet. Too quiet, honestly. Dad still called, but only when Melissa wasn't around. He said she was angry about the attorney. He said she'd accused me of poisoning him against her. He said Brent had stopped speaking to him entirely after the deed thing stalled. He tried to make it sound manageable, but I could hear the strain. Then came the hospital. According to what I pieced together later, Dad had gotten dizzy in the kitchen around 5 a.m. trying to make coffee. He had chest pain, then nearly blacked out. Melissa was there because she had stayed overnight. She called 911. At the they initially thought maybe it was another cardiac episode because he'd had some history with atrial fibrillation, but it turned out to be a combination of a heart rhythm problem, dehydration, and an ugly blood pressure spike. Not technically a stroke, not a heart attack, but serious enough that he was admitted for monitoring and medication adjustments. At some point that first day, when Melissa left the room to call people or get coffee or curate sympathy on Facebook, Dad told the nurse he wanted me involved. That part matters, because while I was driving down there with my phone on the charger and my stomach in knots, Melissa was apparently telling everyone who would listen that Dad was confused, exhausted, and not up for emotional visitors. Emotional visitor meaning me. So there I was, standing outside room 427 while she blocked the door with one hand and clutched her iced coffee with the other. I said, "Move." She said, "No, Melissa, he just fell asleep. I don't care if he's asleep. I need to see him. He does not need this right now." I laughed, but it came out ugly. Need what? His daughter? He needs calm. Then why are you here? That got her. Her eyes narrowed. A nurse at the station looked up. Melissa immediately lowered her voice and put on that composed, aggrieved face she uses for authority figures. "This isn't the place," she said. "No, actually, it kind of is." She stepped closer to me and hissed, "You are not going to barge in after doing nothing for months and make yourself the hero." That made me so angry I had to physically unclench my hands. Doing nothing. I thought about the weekly calls, the flights, the legal pad with Marcy's number. The way I'd spent the last 6 months waking up at 2 a.m. wondering if Dad had signed something he didn't understand. I thought about Melissa living in his house rent-free while telling people I checked out. I said, "I'm not here to be a hero. I'm here because he's my father." And she said, "Then act like one of his children and respect what he needs." That sentence was so insane I almost admired it. Before I could answer, a man in navy scrubs and a white coat rounded the corner from the hall near the elevators. He was probably late 40s, maybe early 50s, thin, glasses, badge clipped to his chest. He glanced from Melissa to me to the door. "Lauren Donovan?" he asked. Melissa's whole posture changed. "Yes," I said. "I'm Dr. Patel." I had never been so relieved to hear my own name. Melissa jumped in before I could speak. "She just got here. Dad's resting, and I was telling her." Dr. Patel cut her off without even raising his voice. Mr. Donovan asked that these be given to Lauren when she arrived. He was holding a large manila envelope. For a second I genuinely didn't understand what I was looking at. My brain was still in fight mode. Then he stepped toward me and placed the envelope in my hands. Not Melissa's. Mine. I remember how weirdly heavy it felt. Not physically heavy, just important heavy. Melissa stared at it. "What is that?" Dr. Patel said, very evenly. "Documents your father completed with our social worker this morning while alert and oriented." The silence after that felt like somebody had unplugged the whole floor. Melissa actually reached for the envelope. I pulled it back without thinking. "What documents?" she said again, louder. Dr. Patel looked at her, then at me. "There's a HIPAA release naming Ms. Donovan for medical communication, an updated healthcare representative form, and a written statement regarding who your father wants involved in decisions while hospitalized." I swear I felt the air change. Melissa's face went white first, then red. "That's ridiculous. He's been in and out all day. He's confused." "No," Dr. Patel said. "At the time he signed, he was lucid. We assessed that. It was maybe the first time in my adult life I had seen someone tell Melissa no in a way she could not immediately rewrite. She sputtered, "I've been here all day." "Yes," Dr. Patel said. That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just yes, which somehow carried the entire subtext of that being exactly why these documents existed, I opened the envelope right there in the hallway with shaking fingers. On top was a HIPAA authorization with Dad's signature, dated that morning. Under that was a designation of healthcare representative naming me as primary and Melissa as not. Authorized to exclude me from care discussions. Then there was a typed statement on hospital letterhead, witnessed by the social worker and Dr. Patel, where Dad explicitly said that he wanted both daughters informed of his medical condition. But that only I was to assist with decisions during this admission because he felt pressured and misrepresented by Melissa in prior administrative matters. And under that was the real bomb. A notarized revocation of the previous power of attorney, plus a copy of a signed note Dad had apparently brought in with his overnight things, stating that no property transfers, account changes, or legal paperwork were to be discussed with him in the hospital, and that if Melissa attempted to present such papers, staff were to contact me and Marcy Klein. Marcy's card was stapled to the back. I looked up from the page and saw Melissa's expression. Not shocked, exactly. More like somebody watching a door lock from the wrong side. She said, "He did this because you've been manipulating him." I almost laughed again, but this time I was too stunned. Dr. Patel said, "Mr. Donovan is awake now. Lauren, you can come in." Melissa stepped forward. "I'm his daughter. And so is she," Dr. Patel said. Then, because apparently the universe decided I deserved one cinematic moment in my life, he opened the door and stood aside for me. Melissa didn't scream. She didn't lunge. She didn't create the dramatic scene I think she wanted to. She just stood there with her giant coffee and her perfect hair and that stunned look people get when they've spent so long controlling the narrative that they never planned for a witness. Dad looked small in the hospital bed. That's the first thing I remember from going in. Not sick, exactly, though he did look tired and pale and older than he had a month earlier. Just smaller. Hospital beds do that. The room was cold, the blinds were half open, and there was one of those rolling tray tables with untouched jello on it. He had the heart monitor leads on his chest and the blood pressure cuff velcroed around one arm. His glasses were on, slightly crooked, and when he saw me his whole face softened. "Hey, kid," he said. I started crying immediately. Not loud sobbing, just the kind where your eyes flood before you can stop it and suddenly you're wiping your face with the sleeve of a sweatshirt you slept in. I went to the bed and took his hand. "You scared the hell out of me," I said. "Sorry about that. You could have just asked me to come visit like a normal person." He smiled a little. "Did Melissa give you trouble?" I actually barked out a laugh. "You think?" He sighed and squeezed my fingers with what strength he had. I figured she might. That was when I knew this wasn't an impulsive paperwork thing. He had expected it. I pulled the chair closer and sat down. "Dad," I said carefully, "what happened this morning?" He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. "The medical stuff or the Melissa stuff?" That answer did something to me. It was so dry, so him. But underneath it was a level of resignation that made me want to rip every scented candle and motivational water bottle out of his house with my bare hands. "Both," I said. So he told me. The medical part was more or less what I already knew. He woke up early, felt off, got up anyway, got dizzy, chest hurt. Melissa called 911. The Melissa part was worse. While he was in the before they had moved him upstairs, she had started talking about next steps, if he needed rehab or if something more serious came up. She brought up the house. Again. She brought up cleaning up paperwork. Again. At one point, according to Dad, she said, "This is exactly why we needed to have transferred things already." He told her to stop. She got upset. Then when he was finally in a room and a nurse asked about emergency contacts, Melissa answered before he could and started saying I was difficult to reach in. Not really involved. That apparently pissed him off enough that when the nurse came back alone later, he asked for a pen. He had copies of some of the legal paperwork in a folder because Marcy had told him to keep duplicates accessible. He'd been carrying them around in a tote bag in his car, which is such a dad thing to do. He asked for the social worker, signed what he needed to sign, and told them, in his own words, that my older daughter means well until money is involved. I sat there feeling like the floor had tilted. "You brought copies with you?" I said. He nodded faintly. Didn't trust leaving them in the house. That one sentence made my throat close up. "Dad, has she been taking things?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "She's been helping herself." You know how sometimes older people use softer language because saying the actual word feels too humiliating? That was this. Helping herself. Like she'd been borrowing casseroles, not money. I asked how much. He looked at the monitor for a second. "I don't know. Ballpark. I know about 12,000 from savings over several months. Maybe more from checking." She always had a reason. I felt sick. It came out in layers after that. First it was groceries and gas because she was helping him. Then it was money for a car repair. Then school fees for her son, Noah. Then rent when the apartment situation got messy after her divorce. Then apparently Brent's bridge loan issue, which Dad described with visible disdain. Meaning Melissa had taken money for Brent too. There were Venmo transfers Dad barely understood. A credit card she had convinced him to add her as an authorized user on. For emergencies. Charges at places that were definitely not emergencies. Athleta, Sephora, a spa in Carmel, a furniture store. Every time he questioned something, she reframed it as caregiver burden. "You have no idea how much I do for you." That was her favorite line, according to him. And to be fair, she did do things for him. She drove him places. She picked up prescriptions. She handled errands. That's what made it complicated enough for him to keep excusing. It was never pure cartoon villain behavior. It was exploitation hidden inside usefulness. That's how people get away with it. I asked if he had told Marcy about the money. Some of it. Why only some? He gave me the saddest little half smile. Didn't want it to become police and paperwork. He'd rather be financially bled dry than start a scene. That was my father in a nutshell. While we were talking, there was a soft knock at the door and a woman in business casual clothes stepped in and introduced herself as Gina, the hospital social worker. She was maybe in her late 30s, calm voice, clipboard, no-nonsense energy. She confirmed that Dad had completed everything while fully lucid and told me she had documented concerns about possible financial exploitation and family interference with care. She said it in a very measured, professional way, but the meaning landed like a brick. Melissa was still outside. I could hear her voice down the hall, clipped and angry, probably on the phone. Gina asked Dad if he wanted Melissa allowed in the room that afternoon. He stared at the blanket for a long moment. Then he said, "Not alone." That was it. That was the line. Not banned forever. Not disowned. Just not alone. It made me ache for him. Even now, after everything, he still wanted the least devastating boundary possible. Gina nodded and made a note. After she left, Dad looked exhausted. So I told him to sleep and went into the hallway to call Marcy. Melissa was by the window near the nurse's station, talking furiously into her phone. When she saw me, she ended the call without saying goodbye and marched over. "This is unbelievable," she said in a low voice. "You came in here and turned him against me in one day. I wasn't even in the state when this happened. You've been doing it for months." "Melissa, he literally signed a statement in a hospital with witnesses. He was scared, maybe because you won't stop treating his life like a to-do list." She folded her arms. "You really think you're some savior because you live in a city and use legal words?" That was such a specifically Melissa insult. If she couldn't win on facts, she'd pivot to tone and aesthetics. To her, my job, my apartment, the fact that I have friends who compost and read newsletters and own plants that aren't fake. All of that translated to me being self-righteous. Never mind that she's the one who turned caregiving into a branding exercise. I said, "Did you take money from him?" She gave me this look like I'd insulted her dignity. "I have spent the last year holding his life together." That's not an answer. Because I didn't take anything. He helped me. Parents do that. Did he agree to Brent using his money too? Her eyes flashed. So there it was. Brent paid it back. How much? She scoffed. "You don't get to interrogate me." "No, apparently Dr. Patel and a social worker did that for me." She took a step closer and hissed. "You have always wanted me to be the bad guy because you feel guilty for leaving." That one hit, because like most manipulative people, Melissa occasionally wandered into the truth on her way to a lie. Yes, I felt guilty for leaving. I left Indiana at 24 and never came back except to visit. I liked my life in Chicago. I liked that my social circle wasn't just people from high school who married each other and bought beige houses with "gather" signs in the kitchen. I liked anonymity and walkable blocks and Thai food at 10 p.m. And not seeing every person I've ever known in the grocery store. And yes, sometimes that guilt made me easier to dismiss. But guilt isn't proof. I said, "This isn't about me leaving. It's about you treating Dad like an ATM with a blood pressure cuff." Her face changed completely at that. All the anger went cold. "You better be very careful," she said. About an hour later Marcy called me back. If Melissa was polished aggression, Marcy was the exact opposite kind of scary. Older, concise, no wasted words. The sort of woman who probably had never once said, "circle back," in her life. Dad had used her for years for estate planning updates and a small issue with Mom's will. And I suddenly understood why he trusted her. I gave her the short version. She was quiet for maybe 5 seconds. Then she said, "Do not let your sister get him to sign anything. Do not let her take his phone, wallet, or house keys." I'll be there tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? I'm moving some things. I almost cried from relief again. That first afternoon in the hospital felt like 12 hours even though it was probably 4. Melissa kept trying to reinsert herself. She came into the room once while I was there and did that overly bright, brittle voice people use when they're performing normalcy. Hey, Dad, how are we feeling? Dad looked at the TV. She set a smoothie down on the tray table and started fluffing his pillow without asking. He hated that, hated unnecessary fussing. It made him more agitated than just leaving him alone. But Melissa only ever recognized care when it looked like visible activity. At one point she said, I was thinking while you rest, I can run by the house and grab the blue folder. Dad said, immediately, no. She froze. Why? I don't want anything moved. I'm just organizing. No. She looked at me and smiled without warmth. Well, someone's getting territorial. I was honestly impressed at the audacity. Later that evening, Gina arranged for a note in his chart restricting non-approved paperwork and requiring staff to verify visitors if Dad was sleeping or sedated. Melissa found out and absolutely lost it in a conference room with Gina and a charge nurse. I wasn't there for all of it, but I heard enough from the hall. I have been the one doing everything. This is his decision, not ours. He's being influenced. Your father is entitled to choose who assists him. You people don't understand my sister. That part would have been funny under different circumstances. Like yes, please, tell the hospital staff about the dangerous younger daughter who's criminal. Background consists of bringing Dad soup and insisting he use a lawyer. I stayed at a Hampton Inn off 86th Street that night because I had booked it in a panic from the parking garage. I sat on the edge of that aggressively beige hotel bed eating stale Cheez-Its from the vending machine and staring at the copies of the documents in my lap. Everything I had worried about for months was real. Worse than real, documented, and underneath the relief of finally not feeling crazy was this deep, heavy sadness I couldn't shake. Because when people hear stories like this, they imagine a dramatic turning point where the truth comes out and then the victim gets righteously angry and the bad person gets exposed, and that's satisfying. Real life is uglier and more pathetic. My dad didn't look vindicated. He looked tired, humiliated, hurt, like a man realizing that needing help had opened the door to being managed by his own child. And Melissa, for all my anger at her, didn't look like a mastermind. She looked like someone who had built her whole identity around being indispensable and then crossed a line so many times she couldn't even tell where the line used to be. The next morning Marcy arrived in a navy blazer carrying a leather tote and the energy of a woman who had ended many people's nonsense before breakfast. She met with Dad privately first, then with me, then with Gina and one of the hospital administrators. By noon, she had already contacted Dad's bank, flagged the previous power of attorney as revoked, requested a freeze on major transfers pending his in-person review, and arranged for a locksmith to change the house locks as soon as Dad approved it. When Melissa found out about the locks, she exploded. She cornered me in the family waiting area where there was a sad ficus and a muted TV playing HGTV. You changed the locks? Are you kidding me? I didn't. Dad authorized it. I live there. No, you stay there. My son's things are there. Then you can arrange a time to get them. She actually laughed. You can't do that. I said, watch us. She called me a bitch. Full volume. In a hospital. A volunteer at the desk looked over. Melissa lowered her voice again, but her whole face had gone blotchy. You always wanted this. That is such a weird thing to say about our dad being hospitalized. You wanted me out of that house. No, I wanted you to stop taking advantage of him. She jabbed a finger toward me. I gave up a year of my life for him. That sentence sat between us. And here's the thing nobody likes admitting in families like this. Two things can be true at once. Melissa had absolutely done real work. She had spent time, run errands, managed logistics, sat at appointments. She had also leveraged all of that into access, guilt, control, and money. Care does not cancel exploitation. Exploitation does not erase care. That's what makes it so hard. I said, quieter, then you should have asked him for help honestly. Not like this. She looked at me for a second like I'd slapped her. Then she said something I will probably hear in my head forever. You have no idea what it costs to stay. I didn't answer because honestly, in that moment, I realized she was saying something bigger than the money. She meant Indiana, divorce, parenting alone half the week, watching me leave and build a life somewhere else while she stayed close enough to be obligated but not close enough to be appreciated. She meant the cost of becoming the local daughter, the available daughter. The daughter everyone assumes will absorb the mess because she's nearby. And if she had said all that 5 years earlier, maybe there could have been a real conversation. but by now it was wrapped around stolen money and title paperwork and a man in a hospital bed. So I just said, "That still doesn't make this yours." She walked away after that. Over the next 2 days the situation got uglier and more official. Dad improved medically. His rhythm stabilized, the medication adjustments seemed to work. And once he'd had sleep and fluids and some distance from Melissa's constant hovering. He looked sharper, angry, even, which I weirdly found reassuring. Marcy came back with copies of Dad's financial records. Not everything, but enough. The numbers were sickening. There had been direct transfers to Melissa totaling a little over $18,000 in 11 months. Credit card charges on the authorized user card at clothing stores, salons, restaurants, Target, Amazon, a resort in Michigan under Brent's name, and multiple ATM withdrawals Dad swore he hadn't made. One payment toward what appeared to be Brent's truck loan. Several Apple Cash transfers Dad didn't know how to send. When Marcy laid it all out in Dad's room, he just stared at the pages. He didn't rant, didn't yell. He put his glasses on, took them off, put them back on again. Then rubbed his forehead the way he always did when balancing a checkbook at the kitchen table. Finally he said, "I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was vulgar." That was the word he chose. Vulgar. Honestly, perfect. Marcy asked him directly if he wanted to pursue a civil recovery claim or criminal complaint. He said no immediately, then looked at me, then back at the records. Then he said, "I want my accounts protected first." That ended up being the pattern for everything. Dad moved carefully, step by step. Like if he went too fast the whole situation would stop being real and become some monstrous thing. With momentum of its own. He authorized the lock change. He authorized Melissa's card to be removed from the account. He authorized a written demand through Marcy for return of specific amounts and property. He authorized rehab placement that did not list Melissa as primary contact. And then, probably the hardest one. He authorized a supervised retrieval time for her things from the house after he was discharged. When she was formally told all this, she switched tactics completely. The rage didn't work, so she went to tears. She cried in his room. Real crying too, not fake Hallmark crying. Red face, shaky shoulders, mascara smudged. She talked about being abandoned after her divorce. About how hard single parenting had been. About how she never asked for help because she didn't want to seem like a failure. About how she thought what was his would be hers eventually anyway. And she was only borrowing against the future. Borrowing against the future. I wish I were making that phrase up. Dad looked wrecked listening to it. At one point she said, "I was there when Lauren wasn't." I thought he might fold then. I really did. But instead he said, very quietly, "And that's why this hurts. Not because she took money. Because she was the one who was there." That shut the room down. She left after that. Aunt Linda called me that night, which I should have ignored, but I was tired and made a bad choice. Linda is Dad's younger sister and the patron saint of family peace at the expense of reality. She's the type who thinks every conflict can be solved if women just lower their voices and have casserole. She said, "Your sister is beside herself." I said, "Okay." She made mistakes. Linda, she was trying to get herself onto the house deed. Well, maybe she panicked. She's under tremendous stress. I looked out the hotel window at the parking lot and felt almost detached from my own body. Dad is in a hospital bed, I said. He signed documents because he didn't trust her. Silence. Then, "You know how these things can look worse on paper." That sentence is honestly why family systems stay rotten for generations. Things look worse on paper because paper records the thing without the excuses. I said, "I'm not doing this. If you want to support Dad, support him. If you want to manage Melissa's feelings, do it without me." She sniffed in that offended aunt way and said I sounded harsh. Harsh. My family loves that word almost as much as they love family. By day 4 Dad was cleared for a short rehab stay before going home because the doctors wanted to monitor the new meds and make sure he was steady on his feet. Melissa tried once more to argue that he should recover at home. With support, meaning with her back in the house, and got nowhere. Marcy had already coordinated with the rehab facility and the admissions paperwork reflected Dad's stated contact preferences. I drove to the house the afternoon before he was transferred because Marcy wanted me there when the locksmith finished and while Melissa retrieved essentials with an off-duty police officer present. Not because Dad wanted her arrested. He specifically did not. But because everybody involved was finally taking seriously the possibility that she'd either take documents or create a scene. The house felt eerie when I walked in alone. It still looked like Dad's house in all the foundational ways. The framed print of Lake Michigan in the dining room, the old recliner, the basket of remotes, the slightly too cold AC. The smell of coffee and wood polish, but Melissa's presence was everywhere once you saw it. Throw blankets that weren't Dad's, a skincare fridge in the upstairs bathroom, a ring light, expensive shampoo, No's Xbox under the guest room TV, Brent's duffel bag in the hall closet, a stack of wellness supplement boxes on the kitchen counter next to Dad's blood pressure monitor. The whole thing made me furious on a level that felt almost private. Like seeing graffiti on someone's gravestone. When Melissa arrived, she was wearing giant sunglasses even though it was cloudy. And she acted like the entire arrangement was humiliating, which, to be fair, it was. The officer stood by the door. Marcy was in the den with a legal pad. I was in the kitchen pretending to check cabinet contents because looking directly at Melissa for too long made me want to say things I couldn't unsay. She went upstairs, came down with bags, went back up, came down again. At one point she tried to take the black file box from Dad's office closet. Marcy stopped her immediately. That stays. It has family photos. It also contains financial records. It's my mother's stuff too. It stays. Melissa's jaw tightened so hard I thought she might crack a molar. Then she did something that really summed up the entire situation. She walked into the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, and took Dad's spare garage remote off the shelf. I said, "Put that back." She said, "I need it for No's bike." "What? It's in the garage. I'll get the bike." She held the remote up. "This is ridiculous. It belongs to Dad." She looked at me with naked contempt. "Everything belongs to Dad now. Is that what we're doing?" And there it was. The whole worldview in one sentence. Not, everything belongs to Dad because he's alive and it's his. More like, fine, if we're pretending the stuff is still his. I walked over, held out my hand, and said, "Put it back." For one genuinely insane second I thought she might refuse in front of the officer and Marcy. Then she dropped it onto the counter so hard it bounced. Noah, who had been quiet through all of this, appeared in the hallway looking miserable. He was 14 and old enough to understand shame but not old enough to know what to do with it. I felt bad for him then in a way I still do. None of this was his fault. I got his bike out of the garage and loaded 2 bins of his things into Melissa's SUV while she sat in the driver's seat glaring at the windshield. When she finally rolled the window down, she said, "You know this isn't over." And because I was exhausted and angry and beyond pretending, I said, "It actually is, unless you want it to get way more expensive." She drove off without answering. Dad stayed in rehab 12 days. I spent that time splitting myself between Chicago work on my laptop, phone calls with Marcy, visits to rehab, and the endless stupid little tasks that happen when a family crisis stops being dramatic and turns administrative. Medication lists, insurance calls, updating beneficiaries, replacing house keys, going through the pantry, returning a package Melissa had ordered to Dad's address after she moved out. Which for some reason enraged me more than the bigger stuff did. Dad got stronger, physically first, then emotionally in slower increments. We had a lot of weirdly quiet conversations in that rehab room. About Mom, about money, about how embarrassed he was that the nurses and social worker now knew family details he'd spent a year minimizing, about how easy it is to slip from helping someone into controlling them if nobody checks you, about Melissa as a kid, brilliant, bossy, always needing to win. Always needing proof she mattered more. One afternoon he said, "I think she thought if she managed enough of me, I'd become something she earned." I sat with that for a long time. Because it was true not just of Melissa, but of a lot of people. They start doing practical things for someone vulnerable, and instead of thinking, "I'm supporting this person," they start thinking, "I am now the structure of this person's life." And once you believe that, boundaries feel like theft. I asked him if he still wanted a relationship with her. He took a while to answer. "Yes," he said finally. "But not the kind she wants." That ended up being the reality. Not a dramatic no-contact forever situation. Not an all-forgiven Hallmark Christmas either. Something messier and sadder. Marcy sent the demand letter. Melissa's lawyer, because of course she got one, responded with a bunch of defensive language about informal family support, caregiver reimbursement, and misunderstandings regarding jointly anticipated inheritance. Which is a very expensive way to say yes, money changed hands, but she felt entitled to it. Eventually they settled some of it privately because Dad refused to spend his remaining good years in court against his own daughter. Melissa repaid part of the money from a home equity payout after selling some condos she'd co-owned. Post-divorce, not all of it, enough that Dad could breathe and stop seeing every bank statement as proof of his own gullibility. The deed transfer never happened. The accounts were secured. Brent disappeared, which shocked nobody. Melissa stopped speaking to me except through clipped logistical texts for a while. Aunt Linda started saying things like, "Maybe with time this can heal," which I learned to hear as background static. What surprised me most, honestly, was what happened with Dad after he came home. He changed, not personality-wise. He was still him. Still watched the Weather Channel like it was playoff sports. Still bought too many nectarines in summer. Still had opinions about driveway sealant and bad grammar. But there was a new firmness to him that hadn't been there in years. He hired a part-time home aide 2 mornings a week, not because he desperately needed it, but because he wanted practical help that had clear boundaries and an invoice. He started using a CPA for some things he'd always handled alone. He let Marcy and her office organize his estate planning into something boring and airtight. He made a new will. He installed a video doorbell after refusing for years because he thought they were paranoid. He even sold the Big Fisher's house the following spring and moved into a 1-level condo in Carmel. That he chose himself, on his timeline. After touring 6 of them like he was comparing bridge designs. When Melissa complained that he was letting strangers into family business, he said, "That's the point. I still think about that line." A few months after the hospital, Dad and I were sitting in his condo eating takeout from a decent little Italian place nearby when he asked me if I resented him. I said, "For what?" "For not stopping it sooner." I didn't answer immediately because I wanted to be honest. Finally I said, "I think I resent that you were alone in it." He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. Because that was the part underneath all the anger. Not just that Melissa took money or tried to edge me out or stood outside a hospital room acting like she could grant access to a man who'd raised both of us. It was that Dad had been carrying the discomfort by himself for so long, trying to keep the peace. Smoothing over every alarming little thing until the only way he could finally assert himself was from a hospital bed with witnesses. That is such an American family thing, honestly. Everybody smiles through dysfunction until somebody ends up in an ER and then suddenly the paperwork gets honest. Melissa and I are not close now. I don't know if we ever will be again in any real way. We do holidays carefully. We text about Noah sometimes because he's in college now and somehow emerged from all this pretty decent. If you saw us together at Thanksgiving at Dad's place, you'd probably think we were just 2 sisters who had some normal unresolved stuff. She'll bring wine, I'll bring dessert. We'll talk about traffic and college football and whether Dad's thermostat is set too low. Nothing explodes, but there is a line in the room now that didn't used to be visible. She knows I'll say something. Dad knows I'll say something. And I know he knows. The last time the 3 of us were at one table for more than an hour was this past Christmas. Dad had one of those ridiculous battery-operated candles in every window because apparently that's who he is now, and Melissa brought a charcuterie board from some gourmet place and kept fussing that the brie was getting too warm. At one point Dad asked me to grab a folder from his office closet with some condo association paperwork in it. Melissa actually laughed and said, "Still with the folders?" Dad looked right at her and said, "Folders are honest." I nearly choked on my drink. He meant it as a joke, but he also absolutely did not. And weirdly, that's the image I come back to when people ask what happened with my sister in the hospital. Yes, she locked me out. Yes, she told the nurses I was difficult and not involved. Yes, she stood there guarding the door to our father's room like she could decide which daughter counted. But what she never expected was that Dad had finally gotten tired of being managed. That he had already spoken to the doctor. That he had already signed what needed to be signed. That the first person to hand me something in that hallway wasn't my sister trying to control the story, but a calm, bored-looking cardiologist placing a manila envelope in my hands and treating my father's wishes like the only thing that mattered. I can still see Melissa's face when he did it. Not dramatic, not movie villain stunned, just blank in this very human, awful way. Like for 1 second she saw herself the way the rest of us already had. And if I'm being honest, that moment didn't feel victorious. It felt late. It felt necessary. It felt like holding a stack of papers that weighed more than they should have because inside them was proof that my dad had been trying to protect himself while he still could. I took that envelope back to the hotel that night and laid every page out on the little laminate desk under the terrible lamp. The HIPAA release. The new healthcare representative form. The revocation. The typed statement with his signature. Marcy's card. I remember staring at his handwriting more than the legal language. He'd signed the bottom in the same neat block letters he used on the permission slips he filled out when I was 10. Even then, in a hospital bed, shaky and exhausted, he had made sure it was legible. Story 3. My husband secretly paid his ex with our savings. He didn't realize I controlled every account. I found out my husband had been secretly sending his ex money because my phone lit up while I was standing in line at Trader Joe's with frozen orange chicken, paper towels, And a plant I absolutely did not need. The alert was from our savings account. Transfer completed, $2,800. That by itself wasn't weird. We moved money around all the time. What made my stomach drop was the note attached to it. For Marissa, don't mention. I just stood there staring at my screen while the cashier asked if I wanted paper or reusable bags. I remember saying, sorry, 1 second. Like I wasn't reading the digital equivalent of my marriage stepping on a landmine. I'm 34, my husband Ryan is 37, and we live outside Charlotte, North Carolina. In one of those newer apartment complexes with fake luxury finishes and thin walls. We'd been married a little over 6 years, together for 9. No kids, 2 golden doodles, one increasingly expensive dream of buying a house before mortgage rates got even uglier. I handle our money, not in a controlling, weird way, in a practical way. Ryan is one of those guys who is very competent at work and somehow still manages to forget that. Car insurance and electricity are not automatic life things. He's in commercial HVAC sales, charming, good with clients. Lives in quarter zips and on cloud sneakers. I'm a senior payroll manager for a regional hospital network. Spreadsheets calm me down. Budgeting is, unfortunately, one of my hobbies. About a year into our marriage, Ryan overdrafted our checking account twice in the same month because he forgot his annual golf trip rental charged early. After that, he literally said, "Babe, you're better at this. I'll make the money, you do the adult wizard stuff." So I set everything up. Joint checking, joint savings, the high-yield house fund, the emergency fund, the credit cards. Autopay, alerts, fraud monitoring, all of it. We each had access, obviously. He had the cards, the app, his own login. But I was the primary account holder on almost everything because I was the one who opened it. My phone got every alert. My email got every confirmation. My fingerprint approved new external transfers. Ryan knew I managed the accounts. What he apparently never understood was that I saw absolutely everything. That's important later. At the checkout line, I texted him right away. What was the $2,800 transfer from savings? He didn't answer for 6 minutes, which in married people texting time is basically an essay. Then, spotting Damon for the Asheville cabin. He'll pay me back after bonuses hit. Damon was one of his friends from work. Also, Damon's wife posted literally every detail of their lives online, including the fact that they were in Naples that week with her parents. Not renting a cabin in Asheville. So before I even got to my car, I knew I was being lied to. I didn't call him, I didn't confront him. I drove home, put away groceries, and opened my laptop at the kitchen island. The transfer had not gone to a person named Damon. It had gone through Zelle to a number I didn't recognize, attached to a full name I did recognize. Marissa Kane, his ex. Marissa was the woman Ryan dated for 7 years before me. They had lived together in Atlanta. They'd had a dog together. They'd talked about getting married, according to his mom, who told me that at brunch once in a way that made me want to throw a biscuit at her. Ryan always described the relationship as a long, dragged-out thing that should have ended way earlier than it did. He said they wanted different lives. He wanted stability, family, less drama. She wanted excitement, travel, to always be the main character. That was his phrase. I'd met her once by accident, 3 years into our relationship. At a brewery in Charleston during a weekend trip. She was tall, glossy, all tan limbs and white jeans and expensive-looking hair. She gave me a hug like we were sorority sisters and said, "Oh my God, I'm so happy he found someone organized." At the time, Ryan laughed like that was funny. Looking back, I think he liked being described as a man some woman had to organize. When he got home that night, I acted normal. I made turkey burgers. We watched half an episode of some forgettable Apple TV thriller. He showered and came to bed smelling like cedar body wash. I lay there next to him in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought, either there's some explanation I'm missing, or my husband just stole from our house fund to send almost $3,000 to the woman he almost married. At 12:17 a.m., when he was asleep, I got out of bed and took his iPad from the office. Ryan and I knew each other's passcodes. We never had a strict open phone policy because I honestly never felt the need. But his iPad was synced to his messages, and I had a feeling. I wish I could say there was nothing and I had a big moment of shame and then learned I'd overreacted. There was nothing. The message thread with Marissa went back 4 months. It started tame enough. She had reached out after Ryan's dad died in the spring. Said she heard through mutual friends and wanted to say she was sorry. He thanked her. They traded a few memories about his dad making ribs at football games. Fine. I didn't love it, but grief does weird things and people reach backward when they're hurting. Then it kept going. She asked how married life was. He said, predictable, which is mostly good. She sent laughing emojis. He asked if she was still in Charleston. She said yes. Still making bad choices in cute shoes. He said some version of, "That sounds like you." Then, about 6 weeks in, she told him she was in kind of a disaster. Her lease was being terminated because she was behind on rent. Her hours at the boutique marketing agency where she worked had been cut. Her car needed a transmission. She was embarrassed. She hated asking. She didn't know who else to trust. Ryan asked how much she needed. That was the first time I physically felt cold reading a message. She said $1,100 would keep her from getting evicted that month. He said he'd see what he could do. She told him not to tell me because wives always make everything weird. He replied, "Claire sees everything, but I can move stuff around." I had to stop reading for a second after that. Claire sees everything, but I can move stuff around. He knew he was doing something he had to hide from me. He knew it involved money I would notice. He just thought he was smarter than the system I built. The $2,800 transfer from that day wasn't the first payment. It was the fourth. Before that, he had sent $900, then $1,400, then $2,100. Altogether, with the newest one, he'd given her $7,200 in under 3 months. Our house fund had a little over $41,000 in it. Or had. What made it worse was the source. I could see the internal transfers. He wasn't taking the money from checking, where both our paychecks landed and normal monthly life happened. He was pulling it from the savings bucket labeled House 2026 that I had set up in big cheerful capital letters because I was trying to make saving feel motivating instead of depressing. The messages got uglier the further I scrolled. Marissa was flirtier than I expected, but not in an obvious, sexting way. It was more insidious than that. Nostalgic, familiar. She would send, "Remember when we lived in Midtown and ate tacos on the floor because we still hadn't bought a table?" He'd answer. She'd send selfies from her car looking completely feral, and he'd tell her she looked the same. And then there were the digs at me. Not direct ones from him at first. More like little openings that he failed to shut down. She asked if I was still managing his entire life. He said, "She likes systems." Marissa said, "You always did love a woman who can run payroll on your soul." He reacted with the crying laughing emoji. That line sat in my chest like glass. By 2 in the morning, I had taken screenshots of everything, exported account histories, and emailed them to an address Ryan didn't know I had. I also took photos of the transfer authorizations, including the device logs. Every time he'd moved money, it had come from his phone, usually late at night. Usually after I was asleep. The next morning, I went to work like a normal person. I ran payroll for 1,800 people while my own life was quietly peeling apart under my feet. I did not tell my best friend. I did not tell my mother. I did not storm into his office. I did not even mention Marissa's name. What I did do on my lunch break was call a divorce attorney. Not because I was 100% sure I wanted a divorce that second, but because I know myself. If I confronted Ryan too early, he would cry, say it wasn't what it looked like, say he was trying to help someone in a tough spot, and then I would get dragged into a conversation about compassion instead of theft and lying. I needed to understand my options while I still had my head on straight. The attorney, a woman named Denise with a voice like cut steel, listened for maybe 4 minutes before saying, "Do not warn him before you secure your documents." She told me to save statements, tax returns, insurance documents, titles, retirement account summaries, mortgage pre-approval paperwork, everything. She told me not to drain joint accounts recklessly, but that moving half of liquid joint funds into an individual account was not unusual if I believed assets were being dissipated. She told me to keep records of every dollar he sent. Then she said something that turned my unease into certainty. If he's willing to hide money once, he's probably willing to do it again. She was right. 3 days later, he did. This time it was $3,600. I was sitting in a quarterly staffing meeting when my Apple Watch buzzed. I looked down and almost laughed, because the memo line said emergency. I excused myself, went into an empty office, and watched the transfer clear in real time. He had done it from the parking lot of his job. He came home that evening carrying flowers from Harris Teeter. Clearance bouquet, yellow daisies. Ryan never bought flowers unless he felt guilty or accidentally saw another husband buying them. "First, long day?" he asked. "Kind of," I said. He kissed my forehead and started talking about a client dinner next week. And I remember watching his face while he spoke and thinking, this man can look directly at me and discuss salad dressing while siphoning our future into his ex-girlfriend's bank account. That night I checked the messages again. Marissa had sent, "I'm so sorry. I know you're juggling a lot. I hate that I'm even asking. Ryan wrote back, "It's fine. I told you I'd help you get through this." She said, "Does Claire know?" He wrote, "Not everything needs to be her business." That was the moment something in me cooled off permanently. It wasn't just the money anymore. It was the audacity of that sentence. Not everything needs to be her business. Our savings, our marriage, my business. So I stopped feeling like a wife who'd been hurt and started feeling like an auditor who had found embezzlement. I spent the next 10 days gathering information quietly. I opened a new checking account in my name only at a different bank and moved my next paycheck there. I rerouted the autopays for my car, my student loan, my phone, my subscriptions. I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance from Ryan to my sister. I pulled my credit reports and froze my credit. I copied our shared tax returns onto a flash drive and kept it in my desk at work. I also told our realtor we needed to pause our house search. That part gutted me. We had spent the summer doing Saturday open houses, drinking iced coffee and judging backsplash choices like we were on HGTV. We had a whole running joke about how Ryan wanted a garage fridge for beverages and mystery screws. I had a Pinterest board full of laundry rooms I was never actually going to have. We were pre-approved. We were supposed to start making offers in the fall. I emailed the realtor from my work account and said, "Personal circumstances change, please suspend everything for now." Then I cried in the employee bathroom for 7 minutes and put cold water on my wrists and went back to my desk. Meanwhile, Ryan kept acting normal. Maybe extra normal, which is somehow worse. He folded laundry without being asked. He sent me TikToks. He suggested we drive up to Blowing Rock in October. One night he rubbed my shoulders while I was answering emails and said, "I know I've been distracted lately. I appreciate you." I almost turned around and asked, "Do you appreciate me enough to stop financing Marissa's life?" But I didn't. Instead I said, "You okay?" He sighed in this soft, performative way. "Just stressed. Money stuff, work stuff. Money stuff." I said, "What money stuff?" And he actually had the nerve to say, "Nothing serious. Just the market, rates, all that." He said this to the woman who had seen every transfer. At the end of the second week, I found out it was even worse than I thought. There was another message thread. Not with Marissa, with his mother. My mother-in-law, Susan, is the kind of southern woman who can weaponize concern so elegantly you almost thank her for insulting you. She and I had always been polite, never close. She thought I was a little intense. I thought she treated Ryan like a charming teenage boy who should never have to face his own choices. In the thread, Ryan had told Susan that Marissa was going through a rough patch, and that he'd helped a little. Susan replied, "Just be careful Claire doesn't overreact. You know how she is with money." He wrote back, "That's why I haven't told her." Susan. Sometimes it's kinder not to. I read that exchange 4 times. Sometimes it's kinder not to. The amount I wanted to scream could have powered a small city. That weekend, Ryan told me he had a client golf event Saturday morning at 8:12 a.m. His location pinged at a brunch place in South End. I know some people think checking location is toxic. Fine. But we shared location because once he got a flat tire on I-85 and I had to coordinate help. He'd forgotten to turn it off. And at that point I was past pretending I wouldn't use available information. So while he was apparently golfing, he was sitting at brunch with Marissa. I drove there. I know. Dignified women in healthy mindsets do not drive to brunch stakeouts. Apparently I was not a dignified woman in a healthy mindset that day. I parked across the street and watched through the window like a total lunatic. Marissa was prettier than I remembered, but tired looking. She had sunglasses pushed up in her hair and was wearing one of those oversized linen button-downs that somehow only look effortless if you are tall. Ryan was leaning in across the table, hands around his coffee mug, listening with that softened face men use when they want to be seen as emotionally safe. Then he reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I took 2 pictures from my car, then sat there with my hands shaking so hard I had to set my phone down in my lap. It's one thing to suspect your husband is funneling money to his ex. It's another to see that they have built a whole little side emotional reality where you are the obstacle and he is the rescuer. When he came home that afternoon in golf clothes he clearly hadn't sweated in. I was sitting on the couch with a blanket and our older dog, Winnie. "How was golf?" I asked. He smiled. "Hot. I'm terrible." I nodded. "Did you play with clients?" "Yeah, couple guys from Gaston County." "Why?" "No reason." He kissed the top of my head and went to shower. I looked down at Winnie and said, out loud, "Your father is an idiot." The next Monday, Denise filed for legal separation paperwork and drafted financial preservation Requests. North Carolina has its own lovely maze of marriage law. And I won't pretend I suddenly became a lawyer, but the short version was I needed to be strategic. I couldn't just throw his clothes on the lawn and call it a day. I needed documentation, timing, and control. Luckily, control was the one thing I actually had. Over the next few days, I moved exactly half of our liquid savings, plus the amount of my last paycheck, into my new account. I left detailed records. I did not touch his personal retirement account. I did not rack up revenge spending. I was boring and meticulous, which is honestly the meanest way to be in a situation like this. Then I changed the credentials on the high-yield savings and removed external transfer permissions from Ryan's device. I didn't close anything. I didn't lock him out of basic access. He could still see balances. He could still use his debit card tied to checking. I just took away the ability to quietly move money out of savings and into the world without me. I waited. 2 days later, at 11:41 p.m., I heard Ryan get out of bed. He said he was getting water. I stayed still and listened to the tiny sounds of the kitchen. Fridge opening, cabinet closing, phone tap tap tap, pause, tap again. Then my phone lit up on the nightstand. External transfer failed. I almost smiled in the dark. A minute later he came back to bed, restless and quiet. The next morning, he was weird over coffee. Too casual, too careful. Hey, he said, pouring almond milk into his cereal, did you change something with the bank? I took a sip of coffee. Like what? I tried moving some money around for bills and it flagged. Which bills? He shrugged. Just stuff. I set my mug down. What stuff? He gave me this irritated half laugh like I was being difficult. Why are you cross-examining me? I looked him right in the face and said, because I manage the accounts. He held my gaze for maybe 1 second too long, then looked away. Must have been fraud protection, he said. Maybe, I said. That night, I packed a bag and drove to my sister Erin's house in Matthews. Erin is 2 years older than me, divorced, terrifyingly competent. And the kind of person who can make a guest room feel like a recovery unit after emotional surgery. She opened the door in leggings and a messy bun, took one look at my face, and said, "Who am I killing?" I finally told someone everything. She didn't give me any fake balanced perspective. She didn't say maybe he meant well. She didn't say all marriages go through things. She said, he stole from you and lied to your face. And his mom helped. Then she handed me a glass of wine and ordered Thai food. I stayed with her for 4 nights while Ryan texted increasingly anxious messages. Are you okay? Did something happen? Can we talk? I know you're mad about something and I'd rather you just say it. By the second day, he was calling. I let it go to voicemail. By the third, Susan texted me. Ryan says you left and aren't speaking to him. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. I almost admired the nerve. I wrote back, it's not. Then I blocked her. Denise told me not to drag it out once I was ready. When you confront him, do it with the paperwork prepared and the financial protections already in place, she said. You are not looking for a confession. You already have the records. That sentence helped more than she probably realized. I wasn't looking for a confession. I had receipts. So the following Friday, I went back to the apartment while I knew Ryan would be home from work by 6. Erin came with me but stayed in the parking lot in case I needed her. Denise had arranged for a process server to meet us there at 6:30. When I walked in, Ryan was standing in the kitchen like he'd been listening for my car. He looked genuinely relieved for about half a second. Then he saw my face. Claire, he said, thank God. What is going on? I set my purse down on the counter. You tell me. He ran both hands through his hair. I've been freaking out. You disappeared. I went to Erin's. That's not the point. No, the point is you sent your ex over $10,000 out of our savings and lied about it. He went completely still. Not shocked, I knew. Shocked, I said the exact number. I had added the failed transfer attempt. Total attempted dissipation by then was $10,800. He blinked once. What? Don't do that, I said. Do not insult me by pretending confusion. His face changed in layers. First blanked, then defensive. Then angry because he realized there was no path to charm his way around this. It wasn't like that. I laughed. I genuinely laughed. You used our house fund, I said. You told me you were spotting Damon for a cabin. You told your mother I would overreact. You met Marissa for brunch while telling me you were golfing. So before you say another word, maybe think about how stupid you want to sound. He sat down hard on one of the bar stools. For a second he looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Then he said, she was in trouble. I stared at him. That's your answer? What was I supposed to do? He snapped. Let her get evicted? I took a breath so deep it hurt. You were supposed to not use our savings behind my back to play hero to your ex. She had nobody else. She had you, apparently. More than I did. He winced. It was temporary. She was going to pay it back. I said, when? Silence. I pulled printed bank statements from my bag and dropped them on the counter between us. Then screenshots. Then the photo of brunch. He looked at the stack like it might physically burn him. I know about the messages, I said. I know about, Claire sees everything but I can move stuff around. I know about, not everything needs to be her business. I know about your mother telling you it was kinder not to tell me. So if your next sentence is a lie, make it creative, because I'm bored. He covered his mouth with his hand. Then he said the thing that finally ended any tiny floating piece of hope I might have had. I didn't sleep with her. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Not I panicked. I didn't sleep with her. I just stared at him for a second and said, you really think that's the bar? He got up then, pacing. I know how it looks. No, you don't. Claire, no, you do not get to Claire me right now. You took money we saved together, repeatedly, in secret, and then came home and let me talk about open houses and mortgage rates like I wasn't living inside. A joke. Do you understand how sick that is? He started crying. I wish I could say that moved me. It didn't. By then his tears felt like another tactic. Maybe they were real. Maybe he was genuinely overwhelmed. But I was so far past managing his emotions. She was drowning, he said. And I felt responsible. Why? He hesitated. That's when I realized there was one more thing. Why, Ryan? He sat back down. Because when we broke up, I left her with the apartment lease and some debt that was supposed to be shared. I actually frowned. What debt? He looked ashamed. Credit card debt. From when we were together. How much? Around 12 grand then. I stared at him. You told me you ended clean. I thought it was handled. You thought wrong for 7 years? He shook his head. She brought it up when Dad died. Said she was still paying off things from that time. She said she covered for me. So you decided to repay your old relationship debt with money from your current wife. That's not what That is exactly what you did. He sat there breathing hard, face red, eyes wet. And the brunch? I asked. He closed his eyes. I wanted to explain in person that I couldn't keep doing it. I held up the failed transfer alert on my phone. You tried again 2 nights ago. He looked at the screen and then at me, and in that one flicker I saw it hit him. He realized I knew about the failed transfer because I got the alerts. All of them. You saw all of it? He said quietly. I almost smiled, but there was nothing happy in it. I saw every single thing, I said. Ryan, I set up every account, every alert, every external transfer authorization, every password reset. You honestly thought you were sneaking money past me in a system I built. He sank back like he'd been physically pushed. That was the first moment he looked less guilty and more scared. Claire, please, he said. I messed up. I know I messed up. But this doesn't have to be. A knock came at the door. The process server was right on time. Ryan looked confused as I opened it, signed, and took the envelope. Then I set it in front of him on the counter. What is this? Separation paperwork, I said, and notice of financial preservation. His whole face emptied out. You're divorcing me? I'm separating from you. What happens after that depends partly on whether you decide to keep lying. He just stared at the envelope like he didn't understand what paper was. I walked to the hall closet, took down the spare apartment key from the hook, and put it on top of the paperwork. I already moved half the liquid funds and documented everything. My paycheck is no longer going into joint checking. I changed the savings permissions after the last transfer. Autopay for the utilities will continue through the end of the month. After that, your share is your share. I'll be back tomorrow with Aaron for the rest of my things. He looked up sharply. You can't just take the money. I took half and I documented why. Ask your attorney when you get one. He said my name again, weaker this time. Claire, come on. I leaned against the counter because suddenly I was more tired than angry. Do you know what the worst part is? I asked. He didn't answer. It's not even Marissa. It's that you let me feel safe while you were doing this. You let me budget, plan, save, dream, and trust you. All while you were making me look stupid in the background. That's the part one can't get over. He started to say something and then stopped. I picked up my purse. Tell your mother not to text me again. Then I left. The next month was ugly in the least cinematic way possible. No dramatic cheating reveal. No one slashed tires. No one got hauled off by police. It was paperwork, logistics, cancelled plans, redirected mail, splitting dog schedules, awkward conversations with mutual friends, and the strange administrative grief of disentangling a shared life. Ryan moved into a furnished corporate apartment one of his work contacts helped him find. He kept texting for a while. Long paragraphs about regret and context and therapy and how he'd lost perspective. I told him to route anything practical through email. Eventually he did. Susan called me once from a different number after I blocked her main one. I answered because I thought it might be work. She launched right in with, "I hate that this has gone so far over a misunderstanding." I said, "He secretly gave over $10,000 of our savings to his ex." She said, "He was trying to help someone." I said, "Then he should have used his own money and his own marriage." Then I hung up. Marissa, for her part, never contacted me directly. But I know she knew, because the transfers stopped and her Instagram went private. Before it did, Aaron and I may or may not have noticed she was suddenly posting inspirational quotes. Over beach sunsets like a woman who had just weathered a mysterious season of growth. Ryan asked through email if we could meet in person. As people who loved each other for a long time, I said no. Then he asked if we could at least talk about reconciliation after some time and counseling. I said there was nothing to discuss until he repaid the missing funds into the marital account ledger and produced a full accounting of every transfer. He actually did that part, probably because Denise was not someone he wanted to test. The final total was $10,800 sent, plus one failed attempt for $2,500 after I changed permissions. He'd been planning to keep going. That mattered to me more than even the amount. People kept asking if there had to be more to it. More meaning physical cheating, secret child, hidden addiction, second apartment. Whatever spectacular thing would make it make sense. And honestly, maybe there was emotional territory between them that I'll never fully know. But by the end, I didn't need a more cinematic betrayal to justify leaving. He lied, repeatedly. He hid financial decisions. He built a private alliance with another woman and cast me as the problem to be managed. That was enough. About 3 months after I left, the apartment complex sent a renewal offer. Ryan forwarded it to me by mistake because our emails had both been on file forever. Seeing that PDF hit my inbox made me laugh in a way that felt almost normal. 12 pages of fees and square footage and upgraded finish options for a place that was never going to be our home anyway. I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom in South Park by myself 2 weeks later. It's smaller than what we had. The closet is annoying. The parking garage is weirdly dim. But it has giant windows in the living room and a little built-in desk nook where I can pay bills and drink coffee and not worry that the person across from me is quietly rerouting my life behind my back. Winnie lives with me full-time because Ryan travels too much now, and he takes our younger dog, Blue, most weekends. The first couple exchanges were tense and depressing, but eventually they settled into something almost businesslike. Dogs, unlike people, adapt when you stop lying to them about where home is. The house fund took a hit, obviously. Even with him crediting back the money on paper, real life doesn't rewind neatly. There were legal fees, moving costs, security deposits. All the glamorous fallout no one includes in wedding vows. But I kept saving. That's maybe the most me thing about all of this. A few months ago, I was on my couch on a Sunday night with takeout and spreadsheets open, moving money into a new savings bucket. I named it House, again. Erin was over and saw it and started laughing. "Again?" she said. I shrugged. I like clear labeling. She clinked her wine glass against my LaCroix and said, "To controlling every account." And that's the thing. Ryan spent years making jokes about how I was intense, how I loved systems, how I needed to know where every dollar went. Marissa mocked it too. Susan definitely did. They all acted like my attention to detail was some uptight little personality flaw. In the end, it was the only reason he didn't get away with more. He thought because I handled everything, I wouldn't be looking. He forgot that when you build the whole machine, you hear every strange noise it makes. Story 4. My rich uncle left me just one rusty toolbox. Inside was the reason the entire family panicked. I need to get this out somewhere before my phone dies and before my mom calls me back. Because after the week I have had, I am barely holding it together. My name is Danny Whitfield. I am 34. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. And I work as an HVAC tech for a company called Steiner Heating and Cooling. I am not the kind of person who ever expects to be at the center of any kind of family situation. I am the quiet cousin. I am the guy who shows up to Thanksgiving, eats too much, falls asleep on the recliner, and leaves around 9. That is my thing. Last Thursday my Uncle Harold died. We always called him Uncle Harry, even though his name was Harold. He was the biggest personality in our family by a long shot. He owned a chain of auto parts stores called Whitfield Auto Supply that my grandfather started in 1962, and over the years Harry turned it into something like 11 locations spread across central Ohio, a couple hundred employees, and the kind of money where he drove a Cadillac his kids never rode in and lived in a brick house on a lake outside of Delaware, Ohio that my grandmother would have hated because it was too clean. He was 78 when he died. He had been sick for a while, but he was the kind of stubborn where he would not admit it and would not go to a doctor unless you tricked him into it. My mom is Linda Whitfield Zarate, 63, divorced, lives in a townhouse in Westerville. She is Harry's younger sister. There was one other sibling, Greg, who is the black sheep of the family in a way that everybody knows but never really says out loud. Greg is 58 and has been bouncing between jobs and girlfriends for my entire life. He got into some bad stuff in the early 2000s and never really recovered. He has a son named Tyler, who is 32 and is, weirdly, the only grandchild Harry ever gave the time of day. Tyler is the reason Carol, my mom's older sister, hates Greg. Even though Greg is technically her brother too. Wait, let me slow that part down. My mom has 2 siblings. There is Carol, who is 60 and lives in Powell with her second husband. A guy named Rick who sells insurance and owns a boat he never takes out. And there is Greg, who is 58 and lives in a studio apartment in Newark and dates a woman named Tanya who is, somehow, younger than me. Carol and Greg don't speak. They have not spoken since Tyler's college graduation in 2015. When Greg got drunk and called Carol's ex-husband a few slurs in front of Harry's wife Gloria, who had just recovered from cancer. Gloria is gone too now, died in 2019. Harry never remarried. None of this stuff is a secret. It is just the unofficial family geography. Everyone knows where the lines are, and they walk around them. Anyway, last Thursday I got a call from a number I did not recognize, with a 614 area code. And when I picked up it was a guy named Martin who works for a funeral home in Worthington. He was very polite. He said Harry had passed in his sleep that morning, that the family doctor had been notified, and that he was calling from the executor's request because Harry's name was at the top of a list. The executor was a lawyer named Cynthia Bell, who I had never heard of. Martin said Cynthia would be in touch the next day, that the service would be Saturday, and that I should pass the message on to my mom if I could reach her. He asked if I had a pen. I did not. I wrote it on the back of a pizza receipt. I sat there on the edge of my bed for maybe 10 seconds and then I called my mom. She did not pick up. She called back 4 minutes later, and when she did, the first thing she said, before I could even say hello, was, "Is it Harry?" Not a question. She already knew somehow. A neighbor of Harry's had called her first, an older widow named Donna, who used to play cards with Harry. My mom said, "We will talk tomorrow. Drive safe." I drove to Westerville and she was sitting on her porch in a cardigan with a glass of iced tea even though it was October. She looked older than she had the week before. I sat in the rocker next to her. We did not really say much. She told me that Harry had called her on Sunday, late at night, and told her he was going to come by on Wednesday to drop something off. He said it was important. He said, "Don't let Greg know I am coming. Don't let Carol know. Just you and Danny. I want Danny to be there." When Wednesday came, Harry had not come. By Thursday morning he was gone. My mom had been waiting on her porch on Wednesday from 4 p.m. until it got dark. The next day, Friday, I drove my mom to Cynthia Bell's office on High Street in Columbus. Cynthia is mid-50s, gray bob, gray suit. The kind of woman who looks like she has never raised her voice in her life. Her conference room had a long table and a pitcher of water with lemon slices and a box of tissues. Set out like she expected someone to cry, which, to be fair, someone eventually did. There were a lot of people at that meeting. My mom, Carol and Rick, Greg, who was perspiring through a gray dress shirt that looked like it had been slept in, Tyler, who had driven in from Cincinnati, where he lives with his girlfriend Kayla. There was also a guy named Frank, who Cynthia introduced as the CPA for the Whitfield auto supply business, and a younger woman named Priya who was taking notes. Cynthia went through the basics. Harry's estate was being probated. His will, which was about 4 years old, left approximately $14 million in total assets, including the business, the lake house, a brokerage account at Edward Jones, and various other accounts and properties. According to that will, the bulk of the estate went into a trust that would distribute, on a schedule, to all 4 siblings' lines: Linda, Carol, Greg, and a deceased brother named Kenny who died in 1999. With Kenny's share going to his children, of which there are 3. All of whom live in Colorado and wanted nothing to do with the meeting. Specifically, under the existing will, my mom stood to receive around $3.4 million in trust distributions over time, plus the lake house. Carol was set to receive around $3.1 million and the Cadillac. Greg was set to receive a lump sum of roughly $1.2 million, which was less than the others because, as Cynthia put it diplomatically, Harry believed in education and sobriety, and Greg's history on both was a factor in the structure. Tyler was named as the inheritor of the business itself, with a controlling interest, with the condition that he complete a business management program at Ohio State within 2 years. Otherwise, the business would be sold and the proceeds folded into the trust. Greg looked like he was going to throw up when he heard the $1.2 million number. But he stayed quiet. Cynthia then said that she wanted to read a portion of a letter Harry had left to be read at the meeting after his passing. She unfolded a piece of paper with handwriting on it. Harry had always had this blocky, slanted handwriting, like someone who learned penmanship in the 1950s and never forgot it. The letter said, "To whoever reads this, I am gone. Do not fight over my things. The lawyer has the main will. There is something else I have left, and it is not in this office. It is for Danny. Linda knows where it is. Do not be in a hurry. Be kind to each other. If you cannot be kind, at least be polite. Love, Harry." That was it. Cynthia set the paper down. Everyone looked at me. My mom was holding her iced tea with both hands, like the glass might fall. And she had the tiniest smile on her face that I noticed, but no one else did. Tyler looked confused. Greg looked annoyed. Carol looked suspicious. Cynthia said, "Mrs. Zarate, would you like to explain?" And so my mom explained. She said Harry had a workshop in his garage. It was a separate detached 3-car garage behind the house, not the main one. It was where he kept tools and where he used to restore old trucks. He had a couple of workbenches, a drummer's kit because he had played in a band in the 70s. 3 snap-on toolboxes that looked like they belonged in a dealership, and a wall of old photos. In the corner was an even older toolbox. It was a steel Craftsman, the deep kind, olive green, with 2 drawers and a top compartment. It was rusted along the seams and the handle had been replaced with a piece of paracord somebody had wrapped around it. My mom said Harry had told her, on Sunday night's phone call, that the toolbox was for me. That I should retrieve it after the funeral, that I should bring it straight home. That I should open it only when I was alone. And that whatever was inside would tell me what to do next. Greg said, "Like hell. What is in the box?" My mom said, "He did not tell me what was in the box, Greg. He told Danny. Let Danny handle it." Greg turned to me and said, "Danny, open the box in front of all of us. We are family." I said I did not think that was the plan, and that the plan was for me to do it alone. And I was going to honor that. Carol said, "Linda, you know what is in there. Stop making this dramatic." My mom said, "Carol, I have not opened this toolbox in my life. I haven't. If you want to be mad at someone, be mad at Harry, who is dead. Or be mad at Danny, who is going to get the box on Sunday after the funeral reception. Or sit and wait." Rick, Carol's husband, said everybody should calm down, and Greg said, "I am calm, Rick. Why don't you go polish your boat?" And Tyler stood up and said, "Dad, sit down." That was the first time Tyler had raised his voice against Greg in probably a decade. Cynthia adjourned the meeting. She said the formal reading of the will would happen the following Tuesday. She said any disputes should go through her office. She said she would be available by phone. She offered everybody tissues and a bottle of water on the way out. I will say this about my family. We fight. We always have. But we are also polite enough to leave a conference room without smashing anything. And that is what we did. The funeral was Saturday at a church in Worthington that Harry had attended on and off since his second marriage, and it was the kind of service where the pews were packed and the parking lot had to use a school across the street. I had not realized how many people Harry knew through the auto parts stores. There were guys in coveralls with their wives. There were 3 pastors, only one of whom Harry had met. And a soloist who sang, "Danny Boy," with a thick southern accent. And a slideshow of photos that ended with Harry holding a chainsaw and grinning in front of a tree he had cut down in 2011. Everybody cried. My mom cried in a way I had not seen her cry since my dad died in 2003. Greg cried too, but he kept looking at his phone, which I noticed and which I will not forget. After the burial, there was a reception at a community center in Delaware. And then on Sunday I drove out to Harry's house alone. My mom had given me the code to the garage door and had a set of spare keys. She had asked me to come with her, but she had a migraine and I told her to rest. I said I would call her when I had the toolbox. The house was empty. There was a smell of pine cleaner. The dining room table had a stack of mail that someone, probably Donna, had straightened. In the kitchen the coffee maker was still on, with half a pot inside, and I dumped it out. The detached garage was at the back of the property, past the garden, behind a row of pine trees. The door was on a remote. I drove my truck up and parked in front, and went inside. The snap-on toolboxes were along the back wall, 3 of them, bright red, shiny, untouched. They looked like they had never been used. There was a vintage Schwinn bicycle hanging from a hook on the ceiling. There was a framed poster of the Ohio State Buckeyes from their 1969 championship, signed by a player whose name I could not read, and in the far corner, on the floor, was the craftsman. It was exactly as my mom had described: olive green, rusted badly along one side. The handle was wrapped in dark green paracord. There was a small dent on the top corner like it had been dropped. The drawers were stiff when I tried to open them. I had to use a flathead screwdriver to coax the top one. I did not open the rest there. I picked the box up. It was heavier than I expected. Not like 100 pounds or anything, but heavy enough that I had to lift with my legs. I brought it home. I parked my truck outside my apartment and carried it up the stairs. My neighbor, a woman named Pat who is 71 and watches a lot of murder mysteries, asked if I was moving. I said no, just a toolkit. She said okay and went back inside. I set the toolbox on my kitchen table. I waited until it was around 11 p.m. after I had eaten a sandwich and checked that the parking lot was quiet. Then I opened the box. The top tray had a bunch of small compartments. There were old screwdrivers, a tape measure, a wedge, a couple of drill bits. I lifted the tray out and set it aside. Underneath the tray, wrapped in brown paper that looked like it had been torn from a shopping bag, was a sealed envelope. Inside the envelope were 3 things. Item 1. A key. Small, brass, with a number stamped on it. 1471. There was a key tag attached with a paperclip, and on it Harry had written, Powell Branch, Box 224. Item 2. A manila folder. Inside the folder was a notarized handwritten will, signed by Harold Whitfield, dated October 7th. That was a Tuesday. He had died on Thursday, 11 days later. The will was short, only 3 pages. Harry had signed at the bottom of each page, his blocky signature. And 2 witnesses had signed as well. I did not recognize the witnesses, but they were notarized by a guy named Gerald Hahn. The contents of the will basically overturned the previous will. It said, leave the lake house to my sister Linda Zarate outright. Leave the Cadillac to my nephew Tyler. Leave everything else, the business, the brokerage account, the rest of the cash, in equal shares to my sister Linda Zarate and to my nephew Danny Whitfield. It was dated 11 days before he died. Item 3. A small black USB drive, the kind you get for $9 at Best Buy, taped to a folded piece of lined paper. The paper said, Danny, open these on a computer you trust. They will explain why. Do not show Greg. Do not show Tyler right away. Show Linda first. She knows what to do. Call Cynthia, and then call me, except you cannot, because I will not be there. Sorry kid, I meant to come by Wednesday. I sat on my kitchen floor for about an hour. I called my mom. I told her I had the box open. I told her what was inside. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, are you sure it is notarized? I said yes. She said, read the witnesses to me. Gerald Hahn, who else? I read the names. She did not know them. She said, okay, take a photo of the key tag. Take a photo of the will. Take photos of the USB drive. Email them to me. Do not plug that USB drive into your laptop yet. Tomorrow morning we go to Cynthia's office first thing. Don't tell anyone else. I said, Mom, did you know? She said, Danny, I knew he was going to do something. I did not know what. He called me Sunday. He sounded like he did when he was a kid. Then she said, I love you. Lock your door. Don't talk to Greg tonight. Greg texted me at 2:47 a.m. I know this because the timestamp is in the thread. He said, hey cuz. Heard you picked up the toolbox today. You open it yet. Whatever's in there I just want my share. Don't do anything stupid. We can split it 50-50 if you want. Just text me back. I did not text him back. I turned my phone off. I will be honest about what I felt. There was fear. There was confusion. There was some guilt. Because I hadn't spoken to Harry nearly as often as I should have in the last 2 years. I had visited twice in 2024 and 3 times so far this year. I called him maybe every 2 weeks. I thought I had time. I had not thought he was going to die in October. I had not thought he was going to leave me anything more than a Christmas card and a jar of pickled okra. I showed up at Cynthia Bell's office at 8:15 a.m. on Monday. My mom was already in the lobby. She had on a navy blue shirt and slacks and looked like she had slept about as much as I had, which was not much. We sat down with Cynthia in her conference room and I unfolded the towel I had used to transport the documents, and I laid out the envelope, the key, the manila folder, the USB drive, and the lined paper. Cynthia asked if she could read it. I said yes. She read the notarized will first. Then she read the key tag. Then she read the lined paper. Then she did something I did not expect, which was to pick up her phone, dial her assistant, and say, Priya, Please pull the probate file on Harold Whitfield and put a temporary injunction on any disbursements. Yes, now. We have a competing instrument. Also please find me Gerald Hahn, Notary Public. And call the Powell branch of the Second National Bank. Yes, today. Then she took out a notepad and asked me and my mom to wait in the lobby. We waited for 2 hours. I got a coffee from the place across the street. My mom did not want anything. We sat in the lobby and I held her hand. She said, "Danny, whatever happens, your uncle loved you. Whatever this becomes, he did it because he was trying to do the right thing." I said, "Mom, what do you think is on the USB drive?" She said, "I think it is the reason Greg has been quiet." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Danny, I have been telling you for 10 years that Greg was stealing from Harry." Nobody believed me. Not Carol, not Tyler, not even you. I said, "Mom, you never told me that." She said, "I told you." You said, "Mom, he's family, don't be dramatic." I wanted to argue with her. Then I realized she was right. She had said, more than once, that Greg was bleeding Harry's business. I had dismissed it. I had been the peacemaker. That was my role. I did not want to be the peacemaker anymore. Cynthia called us back in at 10:45 a.m. In the conference room, sitting in one of the leather chairs, was a man in a suit I did not recognize. He was maybe 60, balding, with a thick silver watch. Cynthia introduced him as Daniel Reston, an attorney whose specialty was estate disputes. Cynthia said, "Mr. Whitfield, I am going to lay out a few things. The will you found is notarized. The witnesses, Gerald Hahn and Sarah Lynn, are both real and have been contacted. Both will testify that Harold Whitfield signed this document in their presence on October 7th of this year, that he was, in their opinion, of sound mind, that no one coerced him, and that he handed them each a $50 bill as a thank you." Gerald described Harold as in good spirits but tired. The will appears to supersede the prior will, which is the one currently in probate. The terms are Lake House to Linda Zarate, Cadillac to Tyler Whitfield. The remainder of the estate, including Whitfield Auto Supply and the brokerage, divided 50-50 between Linda Zarate and Danny Whitfield. The key corresponds to a safe deposit box at the Second National Bank, Powell branch, in the name of Harold Whitfield, box 224, which would not have been part of the original will because he did not list it. The contents of that box would typically pass under a separate bequest, an unaccounted for asset, or into the residual estate, depending on terms. The USB drive contains digital files whose contents I have not yet been able to verify. But the metadata indicates files were modified between 2018 and 2023. What I am telling you, Mr. Whitfield, is that the prior will is now under formal challenge. What your uncle has done, whether or not it holds up in court, is divide his estate in a manner that nearly cuts out his brother Greg, that elevates you, his nephew, to half of the residual estate, and that places the lake house in your mother's name outright, free of trust. Why he has done this, I do not yet know, but I have a working hypothesis. And it relates to what is on that USB drive. Daniel Reston said, "Danny, the safe deposit box first. We'll arrange access tomorrow morning. Cynthia is going to petition the court to freeze any actions on the original will's instructions until the new one is validated. We are talking weeks, possibly months. This is going to be a fight." He looked like a guy who charged by the hour and was about to charge by the month. I said, "Who do I tell about this? Do I tell Carol? Do I tell Tyler?" Cynthia said, "Not yet. We need to verify the box, verify the will's witnesses, and protect those digital files. The minute you tell anyone else, they can file motions. They can dispute the will. They can claim coercion." My mom spoke up. She said, "What if they file motions anyway?" Daniel said, "Mrs. Zarate, they will. I assure you they will. The minute the news becomes official, there will be litigation. The chances of this estate resolving quietly are, in my professional opinion, low." I went home. I had a message from Tyler at 3:14 p.m. Tyler said, "Hey Danny, heard you were at Cynthia's this morning. Is everything okay? If you need someone in your corner, let me know. Dad is being weird, he won't tell me anything." I had a message from Carol at 3:41 p.m. Carol said, "Linda called me. She said there's a new will. Why am I hearing this from my sister and not from Cynthia's office? Please call me today." I had a message from Greg at 4:19 p.m. Greg said, "Danny, whatever is in that box, remember that you and I are blood. The Will family sticks together. Don't let those lawyers turn you against your family. I'm here when you're ready." I did not respond to any of them. At 7:38 p.m. Tanya, Greg's girlfriend, texted me from a number I did not have. I do not know how she got it. She said, "Danny, Greg is freaking out. He needs to talk to you. He has been drinking since noon. Whatever is in the toolbox, please don't let him lose it. He will do something bad. I blocked Tanya. At 9:02 p.m. my mom texted me a screenshot. It was from the family group chat that Carol had set up in 2017, which is supposed to be for recipes and vacation photos and has 23 members of the family in it, including my uncle's ex-wife and her brother and a guy named Don who used to be Carol's neighbor. The screenshot was of a message from Greg, sent at 8:51 p.m., that said, in part, "Danny has something that belongs to me. He knows it. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get what's mine. Don't test me." Then Carol replied, "Greg, you are not well." Then Tyler replied, "Dad, stop." Then my mom replied, "Greg, do not contact my son again." Then Greg replied with a voice memo that nobody could open because his phone was out of storage, or something, and the conversation kept going with people arguing in the group chat, and then Carol shut it off because she said it was getting out of control. I called my mom. She told me to come over to her townhouse. I drove over. I parked on the street. I sat in her living room. She made me tea. She said, "Danny, I want you to give Cynthia the USB drive tomorrow. I want you to sign whatever she asks you to sign. I want you to not watch the contents of that drive yourself, because the contents are going to hurt. And you shouldn't be the one carrying that alone. Whatever Harry put on that drive, he meant for someone else to handle it. And that someone else is the lawyer." I said, "Mom, are you going to be okay?" She said, "Yes, as long as Greg doesn't do something stupid, I'll be okay." I drove home. I locked my door. I put a chair against the door, which was probably paranoid, but I did it anyway. I went to sleep at 2 a.m. The next morning I drove to the Powell branch of Second National Bank with Priya. The branch is on a little plaza next to a pizza place and a FedEx. There was a manager named Edgar waiting in the vault room. He pulled box 224 out of the vault. The box was about the size of a hardcover book. Inside there was a leather document case, a piece of jewelry wrapped in tissue paper that I did not open, a sealed envelope with a note that said, "For Daniel," in Harry's handwriting, an old photograph of Harry and my grandfather in front of the original Whitfield Auto Supply from the 1960s, and a stack of stock certificates. The stock certificates were for shares of a private company called Whitfield Holdings, Inc. There were also some bonds, a small insurance policy, and a notarized assignment of beneficiary on a life insurance policy worth $2.5 million, listing my mom as the primary beneficiary and my Aunt Carol as contingent. Priya made copies of everything. She put the originals back, except for the envelope addressed to Daniel Whitfield, which she gave to me to bring to Cynthia. At Cynthia's office later that morning, I gave her the envelope. She opened it in front of me and Daniel Reston. Inside was a single letter, 2 pages, dated September 30th, also from Harry. The letter explained, in his handwriting, that he had quietly restructured Whitfield Auto Supply over a period of years so that the operating profits were being channeled into a holding company, and that the shares of the holding company were what was in the safety deposit box. He said the value of the estate as listed in his prior will was wildly understated, because it only accounted for the visible pieces. He wrote, "The operating profits of the last 6 years are not in the bank accounts the lawyer knows about. They're in the holding company. Nobody knows about this except my CPA Frank, who has my instructions, and my attorney Gerald, who wrote up the holding structure." He wrote, "I am not hiding this from my family to be cruel. I am hiding it because if the family knew, my brother would take it. Greg has taken enough. He has been forging my signature on disbursements since 2019. I have the proof." Frank did not want to believe it. The USB drive in the toolbox has the bank records. Greg owes the business $487,000. He owes me personally $130,000. Tyler knows about the business debt. Tyler does not know about the personal debt. If Tyler knew, he would not have inherited. I am going to leave the business to Tyler through the holding company because I love the boy. But I am going to put the remaining pieces into the hands of people who will not let it get stripped. Linda has always been the only one I trusted. The letter ended with, "Danny, take care of your mother. Don't let Greg talk you out of anything. Don't open the drive yourself. Tell Cynthia, let them sort it out. You are not the executor. You are not the lawyer. You are my nephew. Be my nephew." I read that letter twice. Then Cynthia turned on the projector. She had a laptop plugged in. She plugged in the USB drive, copying the contents onto a clean hard drive first. And she opened the files in front of me and Daniel and my mom, with the door closed. Inside the USB drive were folders dated by year from 2018 through 2023. Inside each folder were PDFs and a few short MP4 files. The PDFs included bank statements from the Whitfield Auto Supply operating account at Huntington Bank, with handwritten annotations of disbursements Greg had signed between 2019 and 2022 that did not match invoices. The MP4 files were short videos of Harry in his office talking into a webcam, narrating what he had discovered, with the bank statements pulled up on his screen behind him. In one video, dated June 10, 2022, Harry says, "Greg, you son of a bitch. You took $40,000 from the Powell location last week and you put it on a Visa card. For Tanya, you think I won't see it?" There was a video from October 1st of last year where Harry says, "I'm tired. I don't want to fight with Greg. I want him to get help. But if he doesn't get help, I'm going to make sure he doesn't end up with the thing he wants most." There was also a folder on the USB drive marked, Frank. Inside were emails between Harry and his CPA Frank Liu, in which Frank had documented what he called discrepancies in disbursements. Frank had been reluctant. He had asked Harry if he wanted to go to the police. Harry had said no. He said, "I want my family handled inside the family. If I die before I fix this, the USB drive goes to Danny. Because Danny is the only one who won't be afraid of it." I sat at Cynthia's table and I felt like I was watching a man plan his own death. I looked at my mom. She was not crying. She was reading the documents with a steady hand, flipping pages. She had always been like this. She was the person who stayed calm. Cynthia said, "Mr. Whitfield, we now have documentation of misappropriation by Mr. Greg Whitfield against Whitfield Auto Supply in an amount exceeding $400,000 over a 4-year period. We also have a competing will that supersedes the prior will. We also have unaccounted for assets in a holding company. The combined effect is that we are looking at a contested estate with multiple moving parts. And the existence of these documents creates the possibility of civil and criminal action against Greg." Daniel said, "Criminal action is a question for law enforcement. Civil action is a question for us. As of now, the most important thing is that nobody outside this room knows about the holding company, the safe deposit box, or the USB drive, except for Frank Liu. And Frank is bound by his engagement letter. If Greg or Carol or Tyler finds out the full scope, they will file motions immediately." He said, "Mr. Whitfield, you are going to inherit, under this new will, half of a residual estate that includes the holding company and the brokerage account. After the specific bequests to your mother and Tyler have been carved out. The moment the new will is offered for probate, your cousins will be in the press. Your name will come up in deposition. You are going to need to consider whether you want strangers reading your bank statements and your phone records." I looked at my mom. She said, "Danny, the inheritance is not the point." I said, "I know." Cynthia said, "There is another issue you need to know about. The original will leaves Tyler the business. The new will leaves the business to the holding company. The holding company passes, under the new will, into joint ownership between your mother and you. Tyler, under the new will, is only entitled to the Cadillac. That means Tyler, who was supposed to inherit the chain of stores, is now inheriting a car. Tyler is going to be furious. And Tyler is the person your uncle named to inherit the business in his first will. We have to assume that the new will is intentional." Daniel said, "There is going to be conflict resolution within the family. There is also going to be conflict resolution in the courts. We estimate a 12 to 18-month timeline before the estate can be distributed. Even if the new will is upheld, if Greg or Carol contests, the timeline extends." I left Cynthia's office. I sat in my truck in the parking garage and I called my mom. She picked up on the first ring. I said, "Mom, I don't want this." She said, "Danny, you don't have to want it. You just have to not steal it." At 2 p.m. the next day I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up because I had stopped picking up unknowns, but I picked this one up. A woman said, "Mr. Whitfield, this is Marcy Delgado. I'm a producer with WBNS in Columbus. I am working on a story about the Whitfield Auto Supply estate. And we have received a tip from within the family. I was hoping you would be willing to comment." My heart dropped. I said, "How did you get my number?" She said, "I can't say. Do you have a comment on the competing will?" I said, "No comment. Please don't call me again." I called Cynthia. She said, "Who tipped them off?" I told her. She said, "Daniel and I will handle the press. Do not comment to anyone. Do not go on Facebook." I went home. I put on sweatpants. I ate a can of soup. I poured the soup down my throat because I didn't want to think about chewing. I watched a documentary about railroads. I tried to sleep. I could not. That night at 11:17 p.m. Greg called 9 times in a row. I did not pick up. He left a voicemail. The voicemail was thick and slurred and it said, "Danny, it's Greg. Listen, man, I know what's in the toolbox. I know about the drive. I know about the bank. I know Frank. I want you to know I am not mad. I just want to talk. I just want to sit down. I just want to figure it out. Call me. Don't make me come over there. Okay? Don't make me come over there. I forwarded the voicemail to Cynthia. I forwarded it to Daniel. I forwarded it to the non-emergency police line in Columbus. On Wednesday, Cynthia filed a petition in Franklin County Probate Court. Daniel filed an emergency motion to freeze the estate. Priya put a locked PDF of the new will into the court record. Frank Liu, the CPA, signed an affidavit affirming the existence of the holding company and the value of its holdings. The court issued a freeze that same afternoon. The freeze meant that no bank account or property in the estate could be moved, sold, liquidated, or transferred. Greg was served on Thursday at his apartment in Newark. I was told he punched the drywall with his fist before the process server closed the door. On Friday, Tyler called me. He said, "Danny, I know you are in the middle of this. I just want you to know I love you. Whatever happened, I love you. I want to know what is going on, and I will not go behind your back." I said, "Ty, I cannot tell you yet. There is a court order." He said, "Danny, did my dad do something?" I said, "Tyler, there is an attorney representing your father's interests. Please talk to him. I'm sorry." There was a long silence. Tyler said, "Okay, I love you. Good luck." Then Tyler did something I did not expect. He texted me a photo of a yellow sticky note. The sticky note said, "Ty, if you ever need help, call me. H." And it was Harry's handwriting. Tyler said, "Danny, he called me the night before he died. He left me a voicemail on my phone. I have it. I haven't listened to it yet. I'm scared to." I said, "Listen to it with someone you trust." He said, "Will you listen to it with me?" I said, "Tyler, I cannot. I'm not your lawyer. I'm not your uncle." He said, "Okay." Then he sent one more text message. It said, "Be careful." On Saturday, I got a knock on my door. It was Pat, my neighbor. She apologized and said, "Danny, there is a guy in a black truck parked across the street watching your building. He's been there for an hour." I looked out the window. There was a black truck. It was not Greg's. Greg drives a silver Chevy Lumina. It was not Tanya's. I called Cynthia. I called the police. The police came and the truck was gone by the time they got there. I have not slept in my apartment since Friday. I have been staying at my mother's townhouse. I sleep on her couch. I eat her food. I have not been to work in 2 days because my boss told me, when I explained vaguely that I had a family emergency, that he was giving me the week. He said, "Danny, you are the most reliable tech I have. Whatever this is, fix it when you can." I sat down at my mom's kitchen table last night and I opened my laptop and I tried to write this out. I wanted to write it because I needed to know what to say when one of my cousins or my aunt or Greg calls. I also wanted to write it because I have not been able to talk to anyone outside the family about it, and the silence has been making me dizzy. I do not know yet if the new will be upheld. I do not know if Greg is going to be prosecuted, or sued, or both. I do not know if Tyler is going to hate me for being in the will he should have been in. I do not know if Carol is going to forgive my mother. I do not know what the press is going to print on Monday. I do not even know how my uncle got the USB drive into the toolbox. Because the top drawer was stiff and difficult and the tube on the inside of the tool tray had something wedged so it could not be opened without lifting the tray. He was a man of 80 years and bad knees and he had figured out how to seal a thing so that his nephew could find it on a Sunday night, and I cannot get that out of my head. I am going back to Cynthia's office on Tuesday. I am going to tell her I want the inheritance divided, if it's allowed, with all the proceeds that would have gone to me, given instead to a foundation for HVAC trade education in Central Ohio. In the name of Harold Whitfield. I do not know if that is legal. She is going to tell me. But I have decided, if this estate is the size they say it is, I want the part that would have been mine to go to the kids who fix furnaces for a living and get yelled at by people in January. I do not know if Greg will stop. I do not know if Carol will ever speak to my mother again. I do not know if the press truck is going to come back. I do not know if Tyler has listened to the voicemail. I do not know if my mom will be okay on Wednesday when the hearing resumes and the family is in the same room and the lawyer is in the same room and Harry is not. I do not even know why he picked me. There are some things you find out about your family that you cannot undo. This past week has been full of them. The toolbox is sitting on my mom's kitchen counter right now. The brown paper is folded in a neat square next to it. The key is on her keyring. The USB drive is in Cynthia's safe. I just want my uncle back. That is the part one cannot say to anyone in the family, because it would sound ungrateful. And the inheritance has been the loudest story. But it is true. I just want him to come by on Wednesday like he said he would, in his Cadillac. With the paracord toolbox in the passenger seat, with a cigar he is not supposed to be smoking. And a grin on his face that I can hear better than I can see. I want him to walk into my mom's townhouse and put the box on the table and say, "Open it, kid." I want to know what he would have said if I had said no. Story 5. My daughter said I was an embarrassment at her wedding, so I walked away with the gift everyone wanted. My daughter called me an embarrassment in the middle of her wedding reception. And I still remember the exact way she said it because it was so calm. Not angry, not emotional, just annoyed, like I was a spill someone needed to wipe up before guests noticed. "Dad, please," she said, keeping her smile pasted on because the photographer was 10 feet away. "Can you not do this today? You're embarrassing me." I was standing there in a rented tux that didn't quite fit right in the shoulders, holding a white envelope I'd been planning to give her after the toasts. That was the moment I put the envelope back in my jacket, walked out of the ballroom, and took home the one wedding gift everyone had been talking about for 6 months. I'm 58, and my daughter, Claire, is 29. We live in Ohio, outside Columbus. I own a plumbing and HVAC company. My brother and I started out of a garage in 1998 with one van, a used drain snake, and more optimism than business sense. My brother retired 5 years ago after his second back surgery, and now it's just me, my office manager Denise, and 12 employees who have been with me long enough to roast me at company Christmas parties. I'm not a polished guy. I know that. I'm not the kind of father who knows the right wine to order or how to pose for photos without looking like I'm being held hostage. I wear work boots more often than dress shoes. My hands are rough. My nose was broken once in a softball league fight back in 1991. And I laugh too loud when something genuinely gets me. Claire used to love that about me. When she was little, she thought I could fix anything. If her bike chain slipped, if her dollhouse door broke, if the sink in her bathroom clogged with Barbie shoes and toothpaste caps, I was the hero. She used to sit on the garage workbench wrapped in one of my old sweatshirts, swinging her legs while I worked, asking a million questions. Why does copper turn green? Why do pipes rattle? Why does mom say you're not allowed to fix the washing machine after 9 p.m.? Her mom, Melissa, was the real center of the family. She was warm in a way I've never been. I've always been dependable. Melissa was sunlight. She taught second grade, baked things from scratch on Sundays, and could get Claire to calm down from a full nuclear meltdown with 2 sentences and a cold apple slice. When Claire was 16, Melissa died of ovarian cancer. There's no graceful way to write that sentence. One year we were arguing about whether we could afford to redo the upstairs bathroom. And the next I was watching a hospice nurse explain morphine timing while Claire sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the fridge and stared at nothing. If you've never had your wife die while your daughter is still half a kid, it changes the shape of everything. Every decision after that feels crooked. You don't know when to be strict or when to let things slide because she's grieving. You don't know how much sadness is normal. You don't know if you're comforting her right or failing in ways you won't understand until it's too late. Claire and I got through it, but not gracefully. For a while, we were close in a raw, survival kind of way. I learned how to buy shampoo without needing a photo of the bottle. I learned what a senior picture package cost and why it was somehow more than my first car payment. I learned that when she said, "It's fine," it usually meant the opposite. I learned how to sit outside a locked bathroom door and say, "Take your time, kiddo. I'm here," because some nights that was all I had. Then she left for college at Ohio State, and something shifted. At first it was normal distance. She was busy. New friends, classes, internships, bars with sticky floors, football games. All the things she deserved to have. I was proud of her. She majored in marketing, got into social media consulting, started dressing in this polished downtown style that looked expensive even when she swore it wasn't, and she built a life that had nothing to do with me unclogging restaurant drains at 6 a.m. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that somewhere along the line, I stopped being her dad and started being her origin story. The part she referenced carefully. The working class backdrop she edited depending on who was in the room. It happened slowly enough that I kept excusing it. The first time I noticed was at her college graduation dinner. I'd made a joke about how she used to cry every time math homework came out. And she kicked me under the table and said, "Dad, don't tell people stuff like that." Not mean, just sharp. Then there was a work holiday party of hers in Chicago when she was 25. She invited me because she got some big promotion, and I drove up thinking it meant something. One of her coworkers asked what I did, and before I could answer, Claire laughed and said, "Oh, my dad owns kind of a home services company. He's impossible to keep clean." The guy smiled politely. I smiled too, but I noticed the kind of like it needed softening. Later that night, when I mentioned it, she rolled her eyes and said, "Dad, nobody was insulting you. You're so sensitive sometimes." That one stayed with me because I'm not sensitive. Or I didn't think I was. I've spent 3 decades dealing with angry homeowners, drunk subcontractors, permits, insurance adjusters, and one unforgettable church basement flooded with 6 inches of gray water on Easter weekend. It takes a lot to get under my skin. But your kid can do it with one look. Then she met Evan. To be clear, I didn't hate Evan. I still don't, exactly. He's 31, good looking in a bland catalog way, and he works in private wealth management. His family lives in Cincinnati in one of those neighborhoods with brick entry columns and decorative mailboxes that all match. His mom, Andrea, is the type of woman who says things like, "We summer in Harbor Springs," like that's a normal sentence. His dad, Mark, shakes hands like he's evaluating a contractor bid. They're polite, educated, perfectly groomed, and so image-conscious it practically hums around them like fluorescent lighting. Claire fit into that world much faster than I ever could. The first dinner I had with all of them was at Jeff Ruby's Steakhouse downtown. I remember because I looked up the menu online beforehand and nearly choked at the prices. Not because I couldn't afford it, I could, but because I grew up believing a steak should not cost more than a utility bill. I got there early. Nice blazer, clean shirt. Even wore loafers Melissa had bought me years ago for weddings and funerals. Andrea hugged Claire, air kissed the side of her face, then turned to me and said, "You must be Claire's dad. She has told us so much." It was the kind of sentence that sounds warm until you realize it doesn't actually say anything. Dinner was mostly fine. They talked about travel and ski trips and a cousin's destination wedding in Napa. I listened and contributed where I could. When Mark asked about my business, I told him I owned a plumbing and HVAC company. He nodded and said, "Essential services." There's always money in what people can't do themselves. I can still hear that wording. Not insulting on paper, but there was something in the tone. Like I'd confirmed a category he already had filed away. Claire laughed at all of Evan's jokes that night. She touched his wrist when he spoke. She looked happy, so I told myself to stop being defensive and focus on the only part that mattered. Which was that my daughter seemed in love. When they got engaged 2 years later, I was genuinely happy for her. I paid for the engagement dinner. Not because anyone asked, but because I wanted to. We did it at a nice place in German Village. I gave a speech about Melissa, about how proud she'd be. About how Claire had always been stubborn and brilliant and impossible to underestimate. Claire cried. Evan put his arm around her. People clapped. It felt like maybe I'd imagined the distance. I had not. Wedding planning is where the clause came out. Apparently there are now 17,000 invisible social rules around weddings. And I violated half of them just by existing. The venue Claire picked was this restored estate outside Columbus with a chandelier ballroom, manicured grounds, and one of those bridal suites with champagne-colored couches nobody is meant to actually sit on. It looked like the kind of place where every photo ends up in a magazine spread called Timeless Romance in Neutrals. She wanted a black tie optional wedding with custom signage, a content creator in addition to a photographer, personalized welcome boxes for out-of-town guests, and a string quartet for the ceremony. Fine. Her money, Evan's money, whatever. I contributed too. A lot, actually. What most people don't know is that I'd been setting money aside for Claire since she was born. Not just a college fund. A real nest egg. Melissa and I weren't flashy people, but we were savers. After Melissa died, I put even more into it. Some in mutual funds, some in bonds, some into a duplex property I bought 15 years ago in Clintonville when the market was dead in. People told me I was crazy. That duplex was the gift everyone wanted. I'd planned to transfer it to Claire and Evan after the wedding. Fully paid off. Renovated 3 years ago. Good tenants currently in place. It brought in about $3,600 a month after expenses. In this market, that property was worth a little over $640,000. I'd had the paperwork drawn up already with my attorney. All I needed was the right moment. Why a duplex instead of cash? Because Melissa and I both grew up without any cushion. And we agreed years ago that if we ever could give our daughter real stability, we would. Not just a check she could burn through on furniture and vacations, but an asset. Something that kept earning. Something that said, "Here, start your adult life a step ahead." I told exactly 3 people about it before the wedding. My attorney, Denise, because she schedules everything in my life. And Claire's godmother, Susan, because she helped me figure out whether a transfer right after the ceremony would be more meaningful than doing it privately later. I did not tell Claire. I wanted it to be a surprise. I did make the mistake of mentioning to Susan at brunch with a few family members that I had something big for the couple. Susan cried instantly because she cries when gas drops 10 cents, and my sister Nancy, who was there, started speculating out loud. Word got around faster than I realized. I didn't know how much until much later. Meanwhile, Claire had started treating me less like family and more like a loose end to manage. She sent me a mood board for what I should wear to the rehearsal dinner. A mood board. It included examples of elevated understated menswear, and a note that said, "Please no novelty ties, squared toe shoes, or anything that reads too business casual suburban." I am still not entirely sure what business casual suburban means, but I apparently embody it. She also asked if I could keep stories classy during my father of the bride toast. I said, "What exactly does that mean?" She was driving, on speakerphone, and sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. "It means maybe don't tell the one about me puking on the tilt-a-whirl when I was 9. Or the time I got grounded for sneaking vodka in a Sprite bottle. Or anything too, small town." I actually laughed because I thought she was kidding. She wasn't. "Claire," I said, "those are family stories. Dad, please listen to me. Evan's family is different." There it was again. Different. I said, "Different how?" "You know what I mean." I didn't know what she meant, and I hated that I knew. A month before the wedding, we had our first real fight in years. I'd gone with her for a tasting because Evan had a work trip. And at one point the coordinator asked if there were any family-style traditions they should know about for speeches or dances. Before I could answer, Claire said, smiling too hard, "No, both sides are pretty straightforward." I said, "Well, my side isn't exactly straightforward." The coordinator laughed politely, assuming we were joking. Claire did not laugh. In the parking lot afterward, she said, "Why do you always do that?" "Do what?" "Make everything weird." That hit me harder than I expected. I asked her, "Do you actually hear yourself when you talk to me now?" She folded her arms and said, "I'm trying to have one elegant event without worrying that you're going to turn it into one of your VFW fish fry stories." I remember just staring at her because that one was so specific, so old and sharp, that I knew she'd been carrying around embarrassment about me for a long time. For context, yes, I go to the VFW sometimes. My friend Rick bartends there on Thursdays. They do fish fries during Lent. I know half the people in the room. Sorry my life isn't curated enough for Instagram. I said, "You're ashamed of me." She immediately did the thing people do when they've accidentally told the truth. "No, I'm not. That's not fair. You always twist what I'm saying." But once something is out, it's out. After that, we got through the final weeks mostly by being polite over text. She sent logistics. I sent thumbs up emojis like a divorced man who had given up. The rehearsal dinner was at a winery. I wore the blazer she approved. I shook hands, made light conversation, and tried to stay in my lane. Evan's mom complimented the floral arrangements 3 separate times like she personally had pollinated the flowers. My sister Nancy drank too much Pinot and kept whispering that Evan's brother was definitely on Adderall. My niece Kylie filmed everything for TikTok until Claire snapped at her to stop. At one point, I overheard Andrea talking to one of her friends near the dessert table. She said, "Claire's father is colorful, but incredibly generous." Colorful. It is amazing how many polite words rich people have for not one of us. The wedding day itself started fine. It was a Saturday in early June, clear sky, about 78 degrees. One of those Ohio summer days where everything looks freshly washed. I got to the venue at noon for photos. My sister fussed with my boutonniere. My friend Rick, who I'd invited because he knew Melissa and had become family after she died, told me I looked like I was on my way to testify before Congress. I laughed, loosened up, and for a little while I let myself feel happy. When I saw Claire in her dress for the first time, I actually had to look away. Not because it was overly dramatic or anything. It was simple, strapless, fitted through the waist with a long veil. The kind of dress that made her look both exactly like herself and suddenly older than I was ready for. She looked like Melissa around the eyes. That was what got me. She said, "Well?" I said, "Your mom would have lost her mind." She softened at that, just for a second, and said, "Don't make me cry before pictures." So I didn't. We did the first look. We did photos under some giant maple trees. We did family combinations like human Tetris. A bridesmaid named Tessa kept checking lip gloss in her phone camera. Evan looked pleased with himself in that way some grooms do. Like they personally invented being married. Standard wedding stuff. The ceremony was beautiful. I won't lie about that. I walked Claire down the aisle, and for those 30 seconds, all the noise disappeared. It was just me and the kid whose hand used to fit around one of my fingers. Her arm trembled once against mine and I whispered, "You okay?" She gave the tiniest nod. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman?" I hated the wording but said my line anyway. I kissed her cheek. Evan took her hand. Everybody stood there glowing in the late afternoon light like a luxury candle ad. Cocktail hour came, then the reception. This is where it went bad, though not all at once. At first, it was little things. Claire had assigned seats, and I noticed Rick had been placed way in the back near college friends. Not at the family tables, even though he'd known us 20 years. My sister Nancy was offended that Evan's second cousin got a better table than she did in. Announced this to anyone within earshot. Andrea kept redirecting conversations anytime my side of the family got too loud. Claire floated through it all in white satin and a fixed smile. Like a cruise director on the verge of a breakdown. I gave my toast before dinner. I kept it clean. I kept it classy. I said Claire was fierce and smart and that she got her mother's grace and thankfully not my temper. I said love was not about performing perfection but about learning each other's rough edges and staying anyway. People clapped. Even Andrea dabbed at one eye. Claire hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for keeping it nice." Keeping it nice. Still, I told myself not to let it get to me. Maybe she was stressed. Weddings do that to people. Then came the photos during the reception. The photographer wanted a few more family shots near the staircase because the sunset light was good. We all gathered. One of the venue staff handed out champagne flutes for a staged toast shot. Rick wandered over to say hi because he'd stepped outside and just came back in. He was wearing a dark suit, looked perfectly fine, maybe a little flushed from summer heat. Claire saw him and immediately said, "Rick shouldn't be in these." I thought she meant because he wasn't immediate family, which would have been fair enough. But then she looked at me and added, "And Dad, can you make sure he doesn't come up near the sweetheart table anymore?" I said, "Why?" She lowered her voice. "Because he's loud, and people think he's staff or one of your drinking buddies." Now, Rick is one of my drinking buddies, technically. But he's also the guy who sat with me in the hospital cafeteria the night Melissa went into surgery. He's the guy who taught Claire how to change a tire because I was stuck on an emergency job. He's the guy who showed up with casseroles we did not ask for and folded chairs after Melissa's memorial without saying a word. So I said, "He's family." And Claire, without missing a beat, said, "Dad, not right now." Rick heard enough to catch the drift. He gave me that little chin lift men do when they're pretending not to be hurt and said, "All good, man, I'm gonna hit the bar." He walked off. I followed Claire a few steps and said, "That was rude." She spun around, smile gone now. "Can you please stop making every tiny thing into a confrontation?" "Tiny thing? You just insulted one of the few people who actually showed up for us." She glanced over my shoulder toward the dance floor, already distracted, already calculating optics. "Dad, I'm trying to manage a lot right now. And I'm one of the things you're managing?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I should have walked away then and cooled off. Instead, I said, "You've spent this whole wedding acting like I'm some problem you need to hide." She stepped closer, voice low and clipped. "Because sometimes you are." I actually laughed once, not because it was funny. Because I didn't know what else to do. And what exactly am I doing right now that's so terrible? That's when she said it. She looked me straight in the face, glanced at the photographer, then back at me, and said, "Dad, please, can you not do this today? You're embarrassing me." I wish I could tell you there was a big dramatic scene after that. There wasn't. That's almost what made it worse. No one gasped, no violin screeched. The band kept playing some acoustic version of a pop song in the next room. A server walked by with crab cakes. My daughter adjusted the strapless top of her dress, turned away from me, and stepped back into the glow of her wedding like I was a smudge on the lens. I stood there for maybe 5 seconds. Then I felt the envelope in my inside jacket pocket. And something in me went very still. I didn't yell. I didn't call her ungrateful. I didn't make a speech about sacrifice or money or grief or all the things parents stack up quietly. Over the years, I just looked at her back and thought, okay, if that's who I am to you today, okay. I found Rick at the bar. He took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" I said, "I'm leaving." He blinked. "Right now?" "Yeah. Do you want me to punch somebody or drive you?" I almost smiled. "Drive me." He said, "Done." I found my sister first because disappearing without a word felt like it would create more chaos than necessary. Nancy was midway through a second espresso martini and immediately went, "Why do you look like you're about to bury a body?" I told her I was heading out. She said, loudly, during the reception? I said, "Keep your voice down." She looked at my face for another second and, to her credit, sobered up fast. "Did Claire say something?" I didn't answer, and that told her enough. Nancy muttered, "That little idiot," which is the closest thing she has to tenderness. I asked her not to start anything. She said she wouldn't promise, which honestly was still better than expected. Before I left, I went to the cardbox table. Now, before anyone gets weird, I did not steal wedding cards. I took my own envelope out of my jacket and held it for a second. That was all, but standing there, I noticed Evan's cousin Brian and his wife nearby, and Brian said with a grin, "Hey, saving the big surprise for later?" That's when I realized more people knew than I thought. I just said, something like that. Rick drove me home in my truck because I was too wound up to trust myself behind the wheel. We didn't talk much on the ride. Columbus summer evening, windows half down, traffic light, country station playing low. Normal world outside while mine felt like it had been hit with a bat. When we got to my house, I invited him in for a drink. He stayed for one bourbon that turned into 3. Around 11:30 p.m., my phone started exploding. First Nancy, then Susan, then Claire, then Evan, which surprised me. Then numbers I didn't have saved. I let it ring. Finally, around midnight, I listened to Claire's voicemail. She was crying, real crying, not wedding stress sniffling. "Dad, where are you? People are asking where you went. Evan said Brian told his parents you had some huge gift and now everyone's confused. And Aunt Nancy is being insane and saying you left because I humiliated you. Which is not what happened, and I need you to call me right now." Not what happened. 10 minutes later another voicemail came in, this one from Evan. "Hey, Tom, it's Evan. I think there's been some misunderstanding tonight. Claire's upset. My parents are asking questions because some of your family mentioned a property transfer or something, and I just think the optics of you leaving are kind of not good. So if you could call us back, that'd be appreciated." The optics. Even in crisis, that family spoke in PR. At 12:47 a.m., Andrea texted me, "Tom, I hope you're well. Claire is distraught. If this is about a gift misunderstanding, I'm sure it can be resolved privately." A gift misunderstanding. That one almost made me laugh. I didn't answer anybody that night. The next morning, I woke up at 6:10 out of habit, made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and looked at the envelope for a long time. Inside was a card I'd written in the folder from my attorney with the transfer documents. I'd also included a letter Melissa wrote Claire when she was 12. That part matters. Melissa got sick the first time around when Claire was 11. She went into remission for a while, and during that window she wrote a handful of letters for future milestones, just in case. One for college graduation, one for her wedding day, one for if she ever had a child. It was one of those things neither of us wanted to acknowledge too directly. But Melissa was practical even when she was scared. Claire got the graduation letter. She sobbed so hard reading it that I had to pull over in a Panera parking lot because she couldn't breathe. The wedding letter had stayed in my safe deposit box all these years. I was going to give it to her with the property papers. A beginning from me, and a blessing from her mom. Instead, it sat on my table while my phone buzzed itself stupid. Around 9, Claire came to my house. I knew it was her because she pounded like she was still wearing bridal adrenaline. When I opened the door, she was in leggings, an oversized sweatshirt. Yesterday's fake lashes half removed, hair in a knot, face blotchy from crying. Behind her in the driveway was Evan in a Range Rover, sitting stiffly in the driver's seat and pretending not to stare. Claire pushed inside without waiting. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. I said, "Good morning to you too. Don't do that. Don't be sarcastic. You left my wedding." I shut the door. "Yes, I did. Do you know how that looked?" I actually stared at her then because the line was so close to Evan's voicemail it might as well have been rehearsed. How it looked. She crossed her arms. "Everybody was asking where you were. Aunt Nancy told people you were upset. Rick left too. Then Brian told Evan's parents there was supposed to be some gigantic gift and suddenly I've got Mark asking if there's legal paperwork missing and Andrea trying to calm down. Rumors that you took back some kind of promised property. It was humiliating. Humiliating. That word again, just turned around. I said, quietly, "Now you know how it feels." She opened her mouth, closed it, and for a second looked 12 years old again. Then the defensive version of her snapped back into place. "So that's what this is about? You're punishing me?" "No," I said, "I'm responding to you." She threw up her hands. "Because I said you were embarrassing me?" "Dad, I was stressed. It was my wedding. Everything was chaotic." "You didn't say I embarrassed you," I said. "You said I was an embarrassment." That landed. I saw it land. She looked away first. I asked her, "Do you even hear the difference?" She sat down at the kitchen table like her legs gave out. For a minute neither of us spoke. The coffee maker clicked in the background. One of my neighbor's dogs barked twice. Normal morning noises. Then she said, much smaller, I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? She rubbed at her face. I don't know, you always push at things when I'm trying to hold everything together. I leaned against the counter. No, Claire, what you mean is, I remind you of where you came from when you're trying very hard to belong. Somewhere else. She started crying again, which would have softened me if I didn't know that being right and being cruel can look similar from the outside. I stayed where I was. It's not like that, she said. It is exactly like that. She shook her head. You think I'm ashamed because you're blue collar or because you're loud or because you don't fit with Evan's family, but that's not. Then what is it? That question sat between us. Finally she said, you make me feel like they can see everything. I said, everything what? She laughed once through tears. That I'm pretending. That I didn't grow up knowing which fork to use or what wine to order or how to talk to people like them. That half the time I still feel like I'm waiting for somebody to realize I'm not supposed to be there. And when you tell stories, or Rick is being Rick, or Aunt Nancy starts talking about somebody's DUI from 2007, it all comes rushing back. There it was. Not just shame of me. Shame of herself. That didn't make it hurt less. It just made it sadder. I said, Claire, that's your insecurity, not my humiliation to carry. She cried harder at that. A year earlier, I probably would have crossed the room, sat beside her, rubbed her back. Fixed it somehow. But there are moments when if you comfort too fast, you erase the truth just because the truth made someone cry. She finally asked, so what, you were really going to give us a property? I was. Her head jerked up. I went to the table, opened the envelope, and slid the documents out. Not into her hands, just onto the wood between us. She stared. Oh my God. I said nothing. She flipped through the first page, saw the address, saw the legal transfer language, and covered her mouth. Dad. Then she saw the smaller sealed envelope with Melissa's handwriting on it. That broke her. She started sobbing in this awful, animal way I hadn't heard since the Panera parking lot after graduation. No. I picked up Melissa's letter before she could touch it. Her eyes went straight to my hand. You were going to give me Mom's letter? Yes. And now you're not? No. She put both palms flat on the table. Please don't do this. I wish I could say I was cold. I wasn't. I was wrecked. But I was also done being treated like an accessory. I said, your mom wrote that for the daughter she knew. The one who loved people better than appearances. The one who would have been honored to have the weird, loud, imperfect people who carried this family standing close on her wedding day. Maybe that girl is still in there. I hope so. But the woman who looked at me last night and said I was an embarrassment doesn't get this from me. While the ink is still wet on that sentence. She looked like I'd slapped her. Maybe emotionally, I had. At that point Evan came to the door and knocked once. Then let himself halfway in when he heard crying. Claire? He looked at the table, saw the papers, saw her face, and immediately pieced together enough to be dangerous. Tom, he said carefully, I think everyone's emotional right now. I said, that's a safe bet. He took a breath. If this is about timing, we can all revisit it in a week. That was when I knew he still didn't get it. He thought this was a negotiation. A delayed transaction. A temp flare-up before the adults got back to business. I said, it's not about timing. His eyes flicked to the property address again. That's a substantial asset. No kidding. Claire snapped at him, stop. But he kept going. I understand you're hurt, but with respect. Using a promised gift to make a point after the ceremony is only going to damage things further. I looked at him and said, Evan, you never had that gift. Neither of you did. It was mine until the second I decided to give it. And last night, I changed my mind. He pressed his lips together. Claire stood up so fast the chair scraped. Dad, please. I said, no. Then, because I'm not made of stone, I added, not forever maybe. But not now. And not like this. She sank back down. They left 20 minutes later with nothing except red eyes and silence. Over the next week, all the usual sides formed. My sister Nancy was fully team burn it all down. She wanted me to sell the duplex and take Rick on a cruise out of spite. Susan thought I was right to leave but wrong to withhold Melissa's letter. Denise told me, in her usual practical way, that giving 600 grand to someone at the exact moment they reveal contempt for you is a poor business decision no matter how sentimental the setting. Rick said only, you didn't overreact. I would have left too. Claire texted 3 days later. Not to apologize. To ask if we could find a path forward. That phrase came from therapy or corporate life. Maybe both. I said yes, if the path included honesty. It took another week before the real apology came. Not a performative one. Not, I'm sorry you felt that way. A real one. She came over alone this time. Hair down, no makeup, Jeans, old Ohio State hoodie. She looked tired in a genuine way, not bridal aftermath tired. She sat at my table and said, "I've been awful to you for years." I stayed quiet. She said Evan had pointed out, after they'd both calmed down, that she monitors every interaction between me and his family before it even happens. That she corrects my phrasing, edits my stories, warns me about clothes. Tries to keep Rick and Nancy in controlled doses, and then tells herself it's just event management. He'd also admitted that he let it happen because it made things smoother with his parents. That, at least, was more honesty than I expected from him. Claire said, "I think after Mom died, I got obsessed with making my life look solid. Controlled. Expensive, maybe. Impressive. I hated feeling like the sad girl with the messy family and the dad who still smelled like solder. Some nights, and somewhere in there, I started acting like the people who loved me were obstacles." I asked, "Do you actually believe I'm an embarrassment?" She cried immediately and said, "No. I think I was terrified that if people judged you, they were judging me. And if they judged me, then everything I built was fake. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't movie dialogue. It was better. It sounded true." I asked, "What about Rick?" She winced. I called him. He hung up on me. "Smart man." She almost smiled. Then she said, "I don't deserve Mom's letter." I said, "Not that day you didn't." She nodded. We sat there a long time after that. Eventually I got up, went to the hall closet where I'd temporarily hidden the safe deposit box key, because looking at it made me angry, and came back. I didn't bring the property papers. I brought the letter. Her hands started shaking the second she saw it. I said, "This is from your mother. It was never really mine to keep forever." She looked at me like she didn't trust the moment. I added, "The duplex is still mine." She nodded quickly, almost in relief, which honestly helped. If she'd reached for both, maybe we'd have been right back where we started. She opened the letter carefully, like it might fall apart. Melissa's handwriting was the same as always. Rounded and neat and a little too cheerful looking for the weight it could carry. Claire read for maybe 2 minutes. Then put her forehead on the table and cried without making a sound. When she finally looked up, she said to marry somebody who makes room for the people who made me. That sounded exactly like Melissa. I said, "Did she?" Claire laughed through tears. "Yeah, we're not magically healed. That would be fake. The duplex is still in my name. I refinanced it this spring and rolled some of the equity into 2 smaller properties. Because old habits die hard and apparently spite can be tax efficient if you talk to the right accountant. Claire knows I may still help them someday. But not as a ceremonial reward and not because other people expected it. If I do it, it'll be because our relationship is real again, not staged under chandeliers. As for Evan, he's been surprisingly decent since then. Not warm, exactly, but more honest. He invited me to dinner a month after the wedding, just the 3 of us, no parents. No polished crowd. We went to a steak place in Dublin. Mid-range. Nobody said, "Summer," as a verb. Halfway through the meal he said, "For what it's worth. My family cares way too much what things look like, and I should have shut that down earlier." I said, "For what it's worth, I care too little sometimes." Claire looked between us like she was waiting for one of us to start a fire, but we didn't. Rick eventually accepted her apology after making her buy him wings and listen to 3 uninterrupted stories about her childhood. He told me later it was worth it just to watch her suffer through the one about getting her foot stuck in a lawn chair at age 7. Andrea still sends me stiff holiday texts. Mark shook my hand at Thanksgiving and avoided mentioning real estate entirely. Progress comes in strange forms. The funniest part, if there is one, is how much people cared about the gift. Not the letter. Not the father-daughter blow-up. Not the actual fracture in the room. The gift. For weeks after the wedding, I heard versions of the same line through family grapevines. Was it really a whole property? Did he really take it back? Can he legally do that after hinting at it? As if the main tragedy was that a free duplex slipped through someone's manicured fingers. Meanwhile, the actual tragedy was simpler. My daughter looked at the man who loved her most consistently for 29 years and saw something she needed to minimize. That takes longer to repair than paperwork. A couple months ago, Claire came over on a Sunday afternoon to help me sort garage shelves because I'd thrown my back out trying to move a compressor I had no business touching alone. She was wearing old sneakers, hair in a claw clip, complaining about how expensive groceries are now even with a good salary. It felt normal in a way I hadn't felt with her in years. At one point she found the old sweatshirt she used to wear as a kid while sitting on my workbench. The sleeves were frayed. There was still a faded company logo on the chest from before I changed the business name. She held it up and laughed. "I can't believe you kept this." I said, "I keep everything." "Yeah, I know. She got quiet after that. Then she said, I really was horrible, huh? I was tightening a box cutter blade and didn't look at her when I answered. Yeah, I said, you were. She nodded like she needed me not to soften it. Then she put the sweatshirt on over her tank top, sleeves too short now, and sat on the same old workbench like no time had passed at all. A little later she asked, do you think Mom would have been disappointed in me? That's the kind of question no parent can answer cleanly about the dead parent. You become the translator for someone who can't correct you. So I told her the truth as best as I could. I think she would have hated parts of how you acted, and loved you anyway. Claire cried a little at that, but not dramatically. Just enough. Then she asked if I wanted to get burgers, and I said yes. So that's where things are. I walked out of my daughter's wedding with the gift everyone wanted, and I'd do it again. Not because I wanted revenge. Though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a bitter little part of me that felt grim satisfaction. When all those polished people realized the crude, embarrassing father was apparently valuable after all, I'd do it again because some things should not be handed over in the same moment you're being told. You're small, money can come later, property can come later, forgiveness can even come later. But dignity, once you drop it on a ballroom floor, is a hell of a thing to pick back up.